and hardcore facts of what we're finding. Interestingly enough, there are a lot of consenting views as to what is happening, what should be happening, et cetera. And we are going to have some presenters today that will hopefully shed some light on each and every one of these things. What we are going to do this year in efficiency of time and respecting everybody's time, although the lovely Chautauqua County weather isn't really abundant for golfing or outdoor activity today, we do respect everybody's time on a Saturday. So what we're going to do is at the end of every presentation, if you have a question for that presenter, please raise your hand and our staff will come around with a note card and a pen if you need it, and just make sure we get those back for each of the presenters. If there is time at the end, we may do another short Q&A, but again, we're just looking and respecting everybody's time as we go forward. With us this morning, we have a great host of presenters. Immediately to my right, we have Senator George Brown, former county executive and legislator who is well aware of Chautauqua County and all of its unique aspects. Alongside of him is our state assemblyman, Andrew Molitor, who again is a county resident, very familiar with Chautauqua Lake. Next to him, we have Chad Staniszewski from the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. Now, please bear with me. I have told Chad he's not in the crosshairs this year when it comes to the wetlands regulations, so please help me out. But no, really, the DEC really is looking out for all of us. And it is a very large agency within the state of New York, and they have a great deal of responsibility, and it's multifaceted. Next to him, Andy Goodell, former state assemblyman, longtime and county executive for the Chautauqua Partnership. Next to him, Whitney Gleason from the Chautauqua Watershed Conservancy, who again will be making a presentation on the watershed. Interestingly enough, I have shared a lot of information, and over the years, I liken the watershed to the preventative nature. So again, what are we looking for? In this society, we want instant gratification. We want to see what happens now. We want to see something done. We want to see tangible results. Well, the watershed is like the young man or young woman who wears his bicycle helmet when they're out driving their bikes, because they're being proactive. Who gets the attention? It's that person who doesn't have a helmet on, who cracks their head when they fall off the bike. They get the immediate attention. So I liken the watershed to the preventative nature of Chautauqua Lake, and they're doing a tremendous job. Along next to her, we have Heather Nolan-Caskey. Heather is the operations manager, if you will, for the Chautauqua Lake Association, the longtime steward here in and on Chautauqua Lake. Next to her, we have Dr. Reisick, who is going to be presenting on the Jefferson Project. The Jefferson Project is a very long and detailed data analysis project going on here in Chautauqua County, and in Chautauqua Lake, excuse me. And not last, but certainly not least, next to her is Dr. Rob Richardson, again from NC State, who will be speaking this year about the 5-year plan and NC State's involvement with Chautauqua Lake and other bodies of water. Also sitting in the back, we do have members, actually a representative from Governor Hochul's office. Frank was here. Yep, there he is. Frank Puglisi from the governor's office is going to be speaking in just a moment. And also we have in the back our new lake management consultant from GEI, and that is AJ Reyes. And AJ will be presenting as well at the end of or actually during the program. So a little bit about this. That 17-mile body of water, 13,000 acres, is a huge economic generator. But as many of us saw last year, and if you see the pictures depicted here on the screen, became a little problematic. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. What you're seeing there is Eladia, and we can discuss a little bit about what happened. But ironically, one of the informational pieces we did find is if you go back and trace, every 7 years, we have had an explosion of Eladia. And Eladia has exploded statewide last year. And it was one of those questions. It's always been in many, many lakes, but why last year did it explode the way it did across the state? There's places, as I'm told, that never had weed problems, that had weed infestations, if you will, or increased weed problems, and the root cause was Eladia. So we'll discuss that in our presentations today. One of the most unique things this morning, if you read the paper, there's been some concern that if we don't do something, property values are going down. Well, I like to say myself and the legislators who are here in the room, and we'll introduce them in just a moment, Headlines in today's paper: Chautauqua County $1 million home sales skyrockets in 2025. Many of those homes are on and around Chautauqua Lake. So we understand that there is property value increase. There may be property value decrease. But we look at what is happening and we feel very confident that we're moving in the right direction. We've begun phase 3 of the Chautauqua Lake Sewer Project. This is a project that has been long overdue. And with our chairman of the legislature, Pierre Chagnon, who was chair of the South and Center Chautauqua Lake Sewer District some 40 years ago, when that project stalled a little bit based on funding. So now we are here to finally commence that last phase of public sewers around Chautauqua Lake. So we have a great deal of excitement, a great deal of interest. I also want to talk a little bit about a group that I've been very excited to work with, and their mentor, their advisor, if you will, is here in the back, Fawn Schuster. It's a group called CHQ Kids Care. This group of people is beyond dynamic. I first met them 3 years ago. They're a little shy as elementary and middle schoolers coming into my office, maybe a little intimidated. They came back 3 years later, and let me tell you, these kids are phenomenal. And they're interested about the water. They're interested about our lake, our tributaries, our watershed. This is the future of Chautauqua Lake, and they are interested. I gave them the microphone, and I had to pull it out of their hands because I wasn't sure they were going to give me enough time to, and Justin, we're doing, let's do a short video. Well, that short video went pretty long, and they were very confident in what they did. But I really am thankful for Fawn and her group because these are young kids that are really excited about the water and the watershed. So again, great opportunity. If I could take a moment to announce some of our county legislators that are here. Our chairman, Pierre Chagnon, is here with us today. Likewise, we have Dalton Anthony, Marty Proctor, Jonathan Penhollow, and I'm not, do I see any other of our legislators? Some people kind of second. If you are an elected official that represents one of the towns or municipalities around Chautauqua Lake, could you please stand there? So many, I'm not sure, I don't want to oversee or overlook anybody. Thank you so very much. Village of Bemis Point, Town of Ellery, Town of Bustye, Town of Ellicott, Village of Lakewood, so many. Thank you for all you do. There isn't any one elected official that represents Chautauqua Lake that does not hear about the lake from somebody. It was interestingly enough, people know that on Sunday mornings between 10 a.m. and noon, you'll find me walking through Wegmans doing my grocery shopping. And interestingly enough, I've had people go, I'm not going to come to your office. I know where I'll find you on Sunday morning. And that's fine. Don Emhart is here as well, the town of Chautauqua superintendent, or supervisor rather. Don and I cross paths, and then people catch either the two of us together or in and of ourselves, each individually. So again, we'd like to thank everybody. And at the end of the day, we're looking to move the needle on what's happening here in that beautiful body of water. So at this time, I'm going to turn the microphone over to Senator George Borrello for a few statements.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much, County Executive. I want to once again thank you for your leadership in this issue that we are dealing with Chautauqua Lake. So, look, we are very blessed to have this lake. I know everybody knows that, but I think the economics of it need to be, I think, highlighted. We have a multi-million-dollar tourism economy that depends on the health of that lake. We have so many jobs that are tied to it. Honestly, tourism is a major driver of our economy here in Chautauqua County and throughout the region. The 57th Senate District that I represent is 5 counties here in western New York, and we're blessed with countless lakes and waterways. This one is the most stressed, without a doubt. But it's important that we recognize the fact that there are efforts being made to improve that. We just need better coordinated efforts. But most importantly in Albany, the Assemblyman and I are really pushing back against bad policy that prevents that lake, quite frankly, from being maximized. The biggest one right now is the wetland regulations. I've been staying in close contact with not only with DEC on this, and I think that our local DEC partners are sincere in their needs to, in their efforts to make sure that this lake is as clean and usable as possible. But we have to fight the statewide role of the wetland regulations that are having a negative impact on our ability to use the lake to its maximum. I also I want to thank the folks that have stepped up. I just had a conversation with the NFIB, which I'm a member of, the National Federation of Independent Businesses. They are part of a major lawsuit that is being heard right now in Albany. They've invested a lot of money into this, and the goal is to roll back these regulations into a more of a common sense form. And I think that's going to be, I hope that it is successful, but I think it's going to be key that we understand that there are people right now spending a lot of money to fight back against those wetland regulations. You know, before I got up to speak, or before when we were all chatting, I was speaking with a couple of gentlemen that are here from Ohio that own a house here. You know, it's no secret that New York State loses more residents than any other state in the nation. We lead the nation in outmigration. But yet we have people that are coming back that grew up in this area and coming back and investing because of Chautauqua Lake and other lakes and waterways. It is the one tie that we have that is actually bringing people back here and investing here. Not because somebody gave them millions of dollars to invest here, because they came here because they love the place that they grew up and they want to have their children who may not have grown up here experience and love the lake that they grew up on. That's really, to me, is the most important part of explaining this to people, that this lake is one of the few reasons why people actually want to come back to New York State. They actually want to invest their own money, not somebody else's money, their own money, without anybody having to pay them to do it. Because we're really good at that in New York State. We're good at paying people to come here and invest. But when we have people that are doing it freely, simply because they love this lake and all the other things that we have here, this beautiful community we have, that's the thing that we have to fight for and protect. And while we have many challenges that are out of our control when it comes to the biology of the lake, we have a lot of things that are within our control here in New York State, and that is bad policy that has not allowed us to maximize the capacity of that lake and keep it clean. You know, we're fighting Mother Nature. I think we all know that. We're fighting Mother Nature in so many ways. But the reality is we do need to have a balanced approach. As I've said before, it's not going to be a swimming pool, but we don't want it to be a swamp either. And that's the balance that we have to strike. And bad policy, including these wetland regulations, also create unintended consequences. The impression that people have of what they can and cannot do with their property, the impression that they have of what the future is. So, you know, I know, because I spent decades in marketing, that perception is reality. And that's exactly why we have to make sure that we continue to protect this asset and let people know that not only are we working together as a group, but that we understand the value of it going forward. So with that, I'm gonna turn it over to our next speaker, but I am interested in hearing from everyone here that represents a diverse group of people that are all working towards the same goal. And if we can all stick together on this and understand that it's a balanced approach and a cooperative approach that's going to make sure that this lake is usable for generations to come. So thank you very much.
Again, uniquely enough, the senator has been a member of the legislature and was our county executive. So he does have a vast knowledge and brings that to the state. You know, interestingly enough, we do have the year of our governor, and it's remarkable. But it's been said to me, with over 7,800 lakes in the state of New York, which one is her favorite? Now, I'll tell you which one is her favorite, and it's here. But I do believe that through the ears of people in Albany, this is probably one of, if not the most studied lake out of all 7,850 lakes that we have here in the state. Along with our senator, we do have our esteemed New York State Assemblyman, Mr. Andrew Molitor, for a few remarks.
Just want you all to know how much I care about you. As I left this morning, my family was having pancakes, so, but I came here instead, so. I'd like to thank County Executive Wendell for hosting this symposium every year. It's such a great idea to get people together to talk about Chautauqua Lake and what we can do to make it better, to improve it, to keep it for future generations. I'd also like to thank Pierre Chagnon and the county legislature for all the time and money that they've invested in Chautauqua Lake, for everything the Chautauqua Lake Alliance is doing. I know that there's many people that are volunteering their time and their efforts to preserve the lake for our future, and I'd like to thank them for all of the meetings that they have and all of the time that they've taken to strategize. I'd also like to thank Congressman Langworthy and our federal partners for their engagement with the Army Corps of Engineers. I know that's a really important piece to this entire puzzle. And I'd like to just sort of highlight what's going on with the state. So we're in the middle of budget negotiations right now, and the governor and the legislature has continued to provide line item funding for Chautauqua Lake, which is huge. I know that the county's in the midst of completing a sewer infrastructure project, which will benefit the lake, and you know, those are resources directed by the state for the long-term preservation of our lakes, and I'm very thankful for that. You know, along with Senator Borrello, we are working very hard. We care very much about Chautauqua Lake. We know that this is the heart of Chautauqua County. And, you know, wherever we think that there's an issue, whether it's wetland regulations, or the way they're being implemented, or trying to get increased funding for Chautauqua Lake, or, you know, trying to bring other groups and partners into this discussion that we're having, we will do it. We are standing with you because we know how important this is to our community. We live here and we care about it. I just want to highlight one last thing that I think is very important, and sometimes this isn't always obvious. Both Senator Borrello and I have constituent services. And it's very, very important that if you're running into an issue or you know somebody that's running into an issue with you know, whether it's a state agency or you know, you think there might be some sort of issue that you can't quite figure out how to resolve, please contact us. You know, this is what we're here for. You know, we can cut through that red tape that's super important and reach out to the people that have the answers and get the answers to you quickly, so that we don't run into issues, you know, with building projects, infrastructure projects, or whatever they may be. So, you know, we care very deeply. That's the bread and butter of what we do, cutting through the red tape. So please contact us so we can be most helpful. And thank you very much for all of you for being here today.
Thank you, Assemblyman. At this time, I'd like to call on Frank Puglisi from the Governor's Office to share a few words with us.
Thank you, County Executive, and thank you for putting this Lake Symposium on every year. 2 years ago was the first event that I came to, but it was also the first event I came to as the governor's Western New York regional rep. I was hired maybe a couple days beforehand. But I will say, as most of you know, the governor is a Western New York native. She spends a lot of time on this lake over the years, and she does care about it. As the Assemblyman said, there are only 2 lakes that actually have line items in the budget, and Chautauqua Lake is one of them, and that is because of Governor Hochul. We are here to help. I cover all 5 counties of Western New York, but we are here to help. We do care about the lake. We work very well with the DEC. So if there is any issues, please let us know. We are available. The county executive knows how to get a hold of me, the senator, the assemblyman. But the governor does care about this lake and understands the value and the economic driver that it is for Chautauqua County. So we are happy to be here and help in any way possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. And, you know, we couldn't be more clear. Little side story, a couple years ago, there was a request for funding to complete the Jefferson project. So request was made to the governor, and I was fortunate enough to meet with her through our Association of Counties, and told me a neat little story, how the funding got there. I won't go into too much detail, but there was an NFL football game that needed to be changed from Sunday to Monday due to a snowstorm. And as a result of that, we got funding for Chautauqua Lake to complete the Jefferson project. So there is always work from very high levels. I think a relative of Mr. Goodell was somewhat impartial to that. So we do thank everyone and every bit of help. You know, looking around right now, the number of people that are here, business owners, realtors, homeowners, investors, you name it, it's a wide variety. So this topic is very important. We have not overlooked our federal agencies that we work with. At the last minute, we were told our Congressman, Nick Langworthy, was unable to attend. I can tell you we have an incredible relationship with our congressman. The very first thing he did when he was elected to office is, county executive, what do you need from me? We talked about Chautauqua Lake, we talked about Lake Erie, and he was able to deliver those projects for Chautauqua County. Uniquely enough, a freshman congressman was able to walk across the aisle and reached out to one of the most esteemed and the longest serving senators in Chuck Schumer. And they were able together to bring money and funding to Chautauqua Lake. So it's not Washington doesn't know, they're very well informed. Very well informed. The congressman, again, sends his regards, was unable to attend today, but this is something in Chautauqua Lake he is very aware of and very passionate about, making sure that the federal dollars are delivered here to Chautauqua Lake, which is not easy because this is a state-owned lake. It's not a federal waterway. So it kind of segues into the next group that is unable to attend today. They were very sorry, but it's the Army Corps of Engineers. Now, we as a county have been meeting with the Army Corps of Engineers for about 10 years, and we were finally able to get this New Start project engaged 2 years ago, which was the Army Corps of Engineers Aquatic Ecosystem Restoration Project. And we were able to sit down with then a young man by the name of Ryan Fisher, correct, Pierre? Ryan is now the lead for all civilian members of the Army Corps. So he has a considerable promotion, but still sat down with us and is very well aware of Chautauqua Lake, very well aware of the needs for funding, also the needs for this aquatic ecosystem restoration project. The Army Corps has vast experience in these types of endeavors, working to create sound ecological restoration projects to get our lake in a much better place than what it is now. Is it going to be the silver bullet? Probably not. But they will invest the time, the money, and the energy to get this back to a more navigable, more usable lake. And that's really what's exciting about this. We can sit down with the members of the Army Corps each and every year and share not only the Pittsburgh region or the Buffalo region that works with Lake Erie, but talking directly to the leadership of the Army Corps and getting our projects funded. So it's very important that these efforts continue as far as our efforts to Washington. And again, when you look at the tens of thousands of lakes across the state and know that our small lake here in Chautauqua County is on the forefront of the national radar when it comes to the Army Corps, that speaks volumes. And our group is relentless. Myself, Pierre Chagnon, Dave McCoy, our watershed coordinator, Mark Geis from the IDA, every year go down to Washington, and every year we make a plea or a pitch to make sure that Chautauqua Lake gets its funding. So, introducing everyone and getting on to the meat and potatoes, although we're not having lunch today, so please bear with us. A man who really needs no introduction. His name has been all over the newspapers here in Chautauqua County with his five-year plan for Chautauqua Lake and its future. But Dr. Richardson is a phenomenal and probably, I would say, one of the world-renowned inland lake researchers. He doesn't focus only on Chautauqua Lake or lakes here in the United States, but he has done research throughout the world. So when we're talking about science and research, know that science and research from around the world is being implemented right here in Chautauqua Lake. So without further ado, we would like to introduce to the podium Dr. Rob Richardson from North Carolina State University.
Well, I'd like to thank PJ for that great introduction and give you all a little warning that I got in at got to the front desk about 12:30 last night, so after that introduction, I'm going to surely disappoint all of you today. So I was asked to speak about research and the 5-year plan during my portion today, so I am going to give an overview of both of those. So leading into research, and the question here really is, what unknowns do we have with any lake management system to where a management plan needs more information to become as efficient as it can be, meaning the management plan does what it's supposed to do without unintended consequences. So there are always unknowns going into any system and any management plan. Chautauqua is obviously a very complex system. There's obviously a lot of public interest and a lot of differing opinions in what Chautauqua should be, how it should be managed. You know, that all increases the complexity, and it also, you know, leads and increases the importance of answering many of these questions. So, you know, what questions need to be answered so that a management plan can work really well here in Chautauqua? And there are always operational challenges on any systems. Water quality, of course, you know, is a big factor in any lake management system. What is the water quality, and what do we want that water quality to be as we conduct management? Invasive species control, you know, certainly that's a big driver here. We need to know what our species are, and in the biology of these species, how they interact, and how we can interfere with their life cycle so that we accomplish, you know, what a management plan should accomplish. And then there's the ecosystem standpoint, right? So if we're trying to reduce populations of invasive species, we also do not want to reduce populations of native, rare, or beneficial species. So there's the trade-off there to consider, and not having unintended consequences of a management plan. So research findings should feed directly back into those management plans, help refine the specific techniques that are used, how those techniques are used, and how that plan changes over time. And there will be, you know, there's always additional problems, problems that arise, questions that arise, things that will need to be addressed. Nothing is stagnant with lake management as you move forward. Nothing stays the same, so you have to adapt and change with times as the environment changes. All the other constraints can change. Water quality can change just based on environment, rainfall, all those things. So things will need to be flexible. Now, one of the big steps is linking plant biology to management, and you have to have a good understanding of the biology of the species that you're dealing with in order to have that linkage. So every species is going to have its own different biological characteristics, and from a distance that may seem fairly trivial, but it can be really important when you start looking at some of the species that are involved. So you can have growth differences, reproductive differences, and all those can impact how a management technique may or may not work in a system such as this. In general, a management technique has to interfere with both growth and reproduction of a species in order to have a long-term effect. So I've got pictures of hydrilla here, which we deal a lot with in North Carolina. The upper picture is Piedmont Reservoir, and that section's 100% covered with hydrilla. So there have been times where someone has gone out to a site like that and put out, say, a treatment that is good. It eliminates all of the shoot biomass that you see there in September, October. Well, the next year that looks exactly the same because the timing was bad, so the long-term effect of that treatment was bad. Hydrilla had already reproduced before September, October, whatever, when the treatment went out, so it was essentially a worthless treatment because the timing did not match up with the biology of the species. Now, if you take that same management practice and you put it out earlier in the season, it would be much more effective. So you have to align things with the biology of the species that you're dealing with. So again, you know, things that look good in the short term might look terrible in the long term if we're not implementing them correctly. Now, on the right is the kind of annual biology of curly-leaf pondweed, and its biology differs quite a bit from most of our other aquatic plant species that we deal with. Curly-leaf will sprout in the fall and kind of hang out over winter. It shoots up early spring, and then usually June, July timeframe, it's senescing, it's dying off. So that biology is quite a bit different than the biology of many of our other species. So that also, you know, leads to some practical questions, such as if curly leaf is senescing in June, July, how many nutrients are released as it senesces, what happens with those nutrients in June or July when water temperature is increasing and a lot of our other species are trying to take off, what is, the specific nutrient cycling there. Curlyleaf pondweed also produces turions, which is essentially a winter bud. That's a long-term survival strategy. Like hydrilla, we did the research to know in North Carolina that hydrilla, those turions can persist for somewhere around 7 years. So if you want a management plan for hydrilla, you have to manage it for 7 or more years to get rid of it. I don't know what the persistence of the curlyleaf turions are. So, that is one question that I haven't seen really addressed in research. So if you're trying to manage curlyleaf pondweed, how long and how intensively do you have to manage it up front to reduce those turions so that it's less of a problem long-term and you get it down to where you're essentially dealing with maintenance levels of control and not nuisance levels of control. Now, Chautauqua Lake, again, is a complex system. You have a lot of different invasive species out there. This is probably just a partial list, but everything from common carp to curlyleaf pondweed to Eurasian water milfoil. And then water quality certainly can be an issue, especially in the South Basin. And then, there's also the aspect of nutrient loading, what nutrients have come in historically, what nutrients do you have coming in on an annual basis, and all this just, increases the complexity of the system and what you all are dealing with. Now, in talking about curlyleaf pondweed and Eurasian water milfoil, these two species grow together a lot, both over in Europe, Asia, but also here in the U.S. They like the same climate, so you can have them a lot in the same systems like you have in Chautauqua. And if you look at the annual biology of these plants, it's almost like they kind of evolved not to directly compete, right? So curlyleaf sprouts in the fall, it shoots up early spring, and then spring is about the time that Eurasian starts taking off. So the life cycles differ and they don't directly overlap. So maybe that's something that's evolved over time so they don't directly compete. Maybe not, maybe it's just a coincidence. But there's also there the nutrient cycling aspect. So if one's dying off and another's taking off, are they just swapping nutrients back and forth, or is there something else going on there? But all these are practical questions, that can help refine specific management so the management is more effective. And of course, you all are familiar with this, Eurasian and curlyleaf growing in combination, and here's a curlyleaf stem. You're starting to see turion production there in the leaf axils, and then moving to Eurasian water milfoil, its reproductive strategy is flowers and seeds. So again, differing biology of the two main plant species that you have out there. So in general, with long-term management plans, I'm going to talk about a few different systems just to kind of give you an overview of how I've helped others with some integration and that sort of thing. So this is Lake Gaston Reservoir on the Virginia-North Carolina line. On the left image is somewhere around 15 years ago. All of the red is hydrilla in the littoral zone of Lake Gaston. On the right is Lake Gaston from about a year ago, and you see a lot fewer red dots. So when I go through this, it's going to sound a lot simpler than it really was. But at the time, management in Lake Gaston, say 15, 20 years ago, of course, they did not have the budget necessary to manage all the hydrilla that was out there. So what they were doing is they would treat one cove, and then the next year that management would shift to another cove, and then it would shift to another cove. So if you look at the image on the left, you can see some coves that don't have hydrilla, and that's probably because they were treated that year, and then other coves that are red. So one of the things that we did, we worked with the manager, and we got them set up on a schedule where some coves will be treated every year, some coves every other year, and some maybe every third year. And then we monitored the hydrilla, and what we found is when they were doing the alternate cove treatment, the growth rate and reproductive rate of hydrilla was such that it would replace all the propagules that had been eliminated in one season. So when they took a year off, they lost all their management inputs on those sites. So it was the same in the long term as doing nothing because they weren't having any long-term effect. On the sites that they did manage over several years, they reduced the hydrilla propagules to a level where it was low enough it could not replenish itself in the short term. So then they were better able to manage it across the whole reservoir because their management became more efficient. And again, that's just one piece of the puzzle. It wasn't that simple in getting from left to right, but that was just one piece of the puzzle there to make the management plan more efficient. Now, again, management plans are not chiseled in stone. You know, they should be adaptive. You should review them every year based on both what the plants are doing, but also how effective are the current management techniques that are being used. Are you accomplishing, you know, what you want to do? So, you know, maybe this is a terrible analogy, but I graduated from Virginia Tech, so I watched James Franklin's introductory press conference, and he said that he's often been accused of having favorite players. And he says, well, it's true. My favorite players are those that are productive and those that are low maintenance. So I've also been accused of having favorite weed management techniques, but I can tell you my favorite weed management techniques are the ones that do what you want them to do in the scenario that you're using them, and the ones that are low maintenance in the aspect that they don't cause unintended consequences. So, you know, if I'm at any lake reservoir that needs management, I don't really care what management technique they use as long as they're using it in the best way possible and it's accomplishing what they want it to do. So, you know, that's, you know, management plans cannot be written in stone. You cannot take one management plan from one lake and just overlay it on another. It's not going to work that way. Everything needs to be adaptive. It needs to be specific to the individual site that you want to manage. And, you know, the stakeholders, you all, you know, your needs also need to be addressed within any management program. So the annual reviews, part of that should be surveys, what's going on in the lake. Part of it is effectiveness of the management techniques. Are those doing what we want them to do? You know, budgets also come into play, of course, because you can only spend so much money, expend so much labor in any given year. So is all of that accomplishing what you want it to do? So again, everything can change with time, and it should change. So I'm not going to. This is overly complicated, and I'm not going to go through it in that level of detail. But essentially, assess your lake, your sites on a year-to-year basis, and see if your management areas are doing what you want them to do. Are we being efficient with management? Are you not having the unintended consequences of, you know, impacting desirable species? Those types of things, and all that should feed back into an annual loop where you evaluate your plan, tweak it as necessary, and then, you know, tweak your management techniques and all that moving forward. So this is just another example of a system. So in the Carolinas, we use a lot of triploid grass carp for management in reservoirs for a couple of reasons, but one, hydrilla is the big problem. Grass carp like to eat hydrilla, but also our reservoirs typically don't have native submerged species, so we don't have those desirable species out there. And I like to tell people in public in the Carolinas, the good thing about grass carp is that they eat most submerged species. The bad thing about grass carp is that they eat most submerged species. So, you know, if you're in a reservoir that doesn't have submerged species, grass carp are a good management technique. If you're at Chautauqua Lake, where you all have got a bunch of native submerged species that are important to the ecosystem, grass carp are a terrible option. So, you know, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. In this system, they did not want to stock, the state did not want to stock typical stocking rate of grass carp for fear of escapement, and they could get out and go to the sound. So herbicides were used for the first few years to deplete the hydrilla tuber bank, and then a very low stocking rate of grass carp was put in years like 8, 9, 10. So when I say really low, it was less than 1/10 of the usual stocking rate of grass carp. So you're getting down to less than 1 fish per acre, whereas we would be stocking like 15 fish or whatever per acre of hydrilla. So this is just an example of a management plan that used one technique for a while to accomplish a short-term goal and then transition to a second technique to, you know, extend the management longer with less intense management. And again, it's just one example. It's not directly relevant to Chautauqua, but just an example of how management plans might want to change with time to maintain efficiency and achieve long-term goals. So another lake, this is a natural lake, Waccamaw, has native submerged species, had hydrilla in some areas, so there were 2 areas carved out in red for management and monitoring, a lot of monitoring around those areas to be sure hydrilla didn't escape from the management zone. So over time, management here did reduce hydrilla tubers, turions in the red areas, and it got down to where after 7, 8 years of treatment, they did not have to treat every year anymore. So again, specific management within one part of the lake and not managing other parts. This is a river system, had hydrilla. There's a lot of rare species in the Eno River, so there were concerns that as hydrilla was starting to choke out the river, if you look down at the bottom right, that hydrilla would impact many of these species that were out there. So before any management was done on the Eno River, in this case, the state of North Carolina did about 5 years of research, of paperwork, of building the case for what could not be done. There were some things that were tried. There's a state park there. The state park got a bunch of volunteers together. They lined their volunteers up across the river. They wanted to see how effective volunteer hand weeding could be, start working their way down the river. You know, how far downriver do you think they got before the volunteers quit in this scenario? You might want to take a guess. Okay, I had 100 feet. I don't know what you said over there, but it's about 10 feet. So, and again, that's just an example, but different things were tried on a small scale before they ended up with what they wanted to do on the management side. There were a few grass carp that were stocked, but of course those shot out of the river and went somewhere else and couldn't be found. But it was, you know, a few to see what would happen, and then they ended up with a different management plan that was primarily herbicides, and here's a before, after from the state park area. And the primary thing in the management plan that could not happen was this riffleweed, which is a native species, which all the rare species use riffleweed for habitat. The one unintended consequence that couldn't happen of the management plan was to have damage to the riffleweed. And this is riffleweed after treatment. It looked the same as riffleweed before the treatment. So the unintended consequence that couldn't happen did not happen in this case, and they've been able to manage it fairly successfully and now only do a treatment maybe once every 3 or so years because hydrilla is at such a low level in that system. Now, that just brings me to the 5-year plan that NC State wrote for Chautauqua Lake. So I'll go through a few components of this. So again, you know, the goal here is to achieve, you know, a stable and balanced ecosystem. So Chautauqua, of course, has a lot of endemic native species, and those species need to be protected. It also has invasive species that, you know, are problematic. So with any management plan, how do you reduce the invasives without the unintended consequence of harming those native species that are out there? So the goal here is to reduce invasive species while maintaining the desirable species that are in Chautauqua. Integrated management, which means essentially using all techniques that you could possibly use in the best way possible and in the way that makes the most sense for the system. So integrated management would be using more than one management technique, not just relying on a single management technique to achieve your goals. And Chautauqua is a great example of a system that should have integrated and multiple techniques used. So there are some priorities set. This plan does include the annual reviews, annual feedback into the plan so that it would be tweaked and changed over time. Specific goals down here on the bottom right, so reduce nuisance levels of Eurasian and curly leaf pondweed, identify control measures for starry stonewort, which is a new invasive species, encourage native submerged vegetation, species diversity, so maintaining the different species that you have out there, in a particular focus on the South Basin where there's not the diversity always in place that there is in the North Basin. Limit continued spread of invasive species. You know, it would not be helpful at all, certainly, to have hydrilla come into this system, so you want to keep the pool of invasives that you're dealing with to be as small as possible, and more species is more complexity there. Try to shift the algal community away from harmful cyanobacteria to more beneficial other algae species, and of course support the local fishery and not have any negative impacts on the fish population. Some of the important plan components would be to have a plan lake manager where oversight is kind of centralized, so somebody to kind of herd the cats, so to speak, somebody to coordinate what the plan is doing and provide linkage to all the parts. So then you have that central entity. They would work directly with state, local, federal agencies to bring all the agencies together, and you know that can sound easy enough on the surface, but some of the examples I gave to you of reservoirs that might sit across 2 states, in that scenario, you've got twice the number of state agencies that you're dealing with and 2 different state laws that all have to be reconciled for your management goals. Here, you don't necessarily have that with the 2 states, but you do have, multiple municipalities, you have the state, you have the Army Corps, and there's a level of coordination that has to be there. Otherwise, the cats are all going in different directions. And, collaborate with the executive board. So again, I mentioned integrated management earlier, so, using the right management techniques in the right ways. There are defined lake areas within this plan, so there are areas for long-term management. So in those areas, you would be trying to reduce the level of invasive species from a higher level nuisance to a low level where it's not really a nuisance and easier to maintain. Short-term management areas, maybe where there's a specific problem that needs to be addressed in the short term, but you don't need the long-term investment in those areas. Maintenance management would be kind of the goal for a lot of the areas, get them down to a maintenance level where really you don't have to put a lot of inputs into maintaining that. So it's down at a low level, everything is fairly stable, and that's a much simpler scenario to deal with. And then there are the habitat protection areas, so areas of high-value habitat on Chautauqua that need to be protected. So those are also carved out in the plan. The plan does go through the biological, chemical, and mechanical control techniques that are available and has some suggestions for, how those can be implemented on Chautauqua. Now, looking at the long-term management section, so this is where we want to target vegetation that's well established. So where we have really high levels of nuisance vegetation, areas that are causing the most problems in one way or another, and trying to reduce those levels of nuisance. Also high use areas, so where are humans frequenting, where is the most obstruction to human recreation, whatever. So those are areas where we need to reduce the nuisance level. But also if you think about marinas and landings and those things, those are great points for our invasive species to spread also. So managing those areas and having lower levels of nuisance populations in those areas where they might spread, not only benefit Chautauqua, but also, other nearby systems. And then the habitat protection standpoint, this would be limited to low impact management only techniques that would have a very minimal impact outside of the species to be managed. And these would contain rare species, sensitive habitat, again, where you don't want disturbance. So this is kind of how those management areas are laid out in the plan. So you can see from year 1 to year 5, the long-term management areas, of course, would go across all those years. Habitat protection zones are not changing on a year-to-year basis, so there's stability there. And then you get out to the shorter term and maintenance, and those would not go across a full 5 years, but be more brief in nature. Vegetation surveys are an integral part of this. Those surveys provide feedback into the plan, how well the management techniques are working, has anything changed, any other species taking off. So you need that type of annual feedback to really know what's going on in the system. Where are the target weeds? What are they doing? How are our rare species responding to management? Are those populations stable or changing? So all this is feedback, into the annual cycle of review. Now looking at some of the target areas and species timing, I'm not going to go through this in too much detail, but most of you know where those high traffic areas are, where the marinas are, North Basin, South Basin, and how the habitat protection areas, so some of the different sites that you might have within the North and South Basin. And currently we're going to be working on a management plan update. So of course, there's the annual survey results that factor in. Also expansion on management strategy recommendations, refining guidelines on how some of those management practices can be implemented or should not be implemented, and incorporation of review comments that we received from the original document that was drafted. So again, looking out over time, your management plan should include follow-up monitoring, track how well things are working, look in at SAV abundance and distribution, the species changes over time, both in species density, but also what's increasing in population across the lake and what's not. How are the management techniques working? Are they doing what we want them to do in the management plan? Do the management techniques themselves need to be tweaked, changed in any way? And include results from the applied research study. So that could be research that anyone is doing relative to Chautauqua. Whatever is pertinent should be included, in how we change things over time, and certainly what the stakeholders feel, how they feel about management and progress with management. So just to quickly highlight a little bit of what NC State has started on the research side. We don't have any results yet. We did submit a grant to New York DEC that's in review. That should cover a comprehensive survey analysis. So, one of the things to consider is that if you have, a species that takes off in any given year, you can't look across that year and identify why that species might have an increase in abundance. So you need to take a broader look across multiple years. So that's nothing that you can do on a single year basis, but go back across all the years NC State's been doing the survey and what longer term trends are going on, and see what we could identify from that as why some species might be increasing or decreasing or just pop up in any given year. Looking at some specific techniques to optimize management strategies for curly leaf and Eurasian, looking at the seasonal growth influence of curly leaf, so what type of nutrient release is coming, what's happening possibly to nutrients that are released around that time frame, and looking at the longevity of the curly leaf pondweed turion bank. So a quick summary just to wrap things up. So, formal adaptive management plan is needed on most systems, and they can be very beneficial because it gives everybody a clear guideline on what's being done and what the pathway is forward. And again, those should not be written in stone, but should change over time. Those vegetation surveys have to be done to feed back into the management plan to know how well everything is working. You have multiple management techniques available, and the best tool is really going to depend on the individual site, the goals, and the species biology that you have out there. And again, we don't just want to remove weeds at one given time. We want to be strategic in how we do that so that we interfere with reproduction and that we achieve long-term goals and not just go out and remove a whole bunch of vegetation at the wrong time. So those are all the prepared slides I brought, so I'll turn it over to how we're doing questions here. Yeah.
Is Ed voice? Oh, sorry. We're back. One of the things, again, as Dr. Richardson said, is really the adaptive nature of these plans. There isn't any one silver bullet. We've gone over that before. But I think what's most important that he pointed out is the federal involvement. And realistically, when the Army Corps came in and started their project, respectfully, with Julia Barrett O'Neill, who's unable to be with us today, the Region 9 director from the DEC, has a great working relationship with the county, but even the DEC said, wow, I think we have a great opportunity to work with the federal government. Now, I can tell you from the federal government and even the state, usually when those two agencies come in, they separate in part like the Red Sea. But this time, they really have begun working together. The DEC has taken on some new studies, and the Army Corps has continued. So exactly to what Dr. Richardson said, those federal and state agencies now are working together to provide the data and the information moving forward. So again, a lot of great things happening here in Chautauqua Lake. We're going to move on next to Dr. Allison Reisick. He's a senior research specialist with the Jefferson Project. Now, the Jefferson Project is a 5-year project that we have now been informed is going to be extended another year and has been producing some incredible results. Now, if you look along some of the tributaries that go into Chautauqua Lake, bear with me, a little bit of a joke. Those are not outhouses that have plumbing to go into the lake, but those are some of the most expensive and most scientific researched huts, if you will. collaboration with the local business here in Cattaraugus County and a longtime resident of the Chautauqua County. But those sensors are amazing, and what they've done is captured so much data, not particularly in the lake, but what goes into the lake. So without any further ado, we're going to invite Dr. Allison Reisick to the speaker podium.
All right, thank you. All right, so before I get started, I also just wanted to mention the research I'll be presenting is the collaboration of a lot of people who are listed on this slide. So we'll be going through some of the research that we did in 2025. So the Jefferson Project, just for a little bit of background, we launched in 2013 on Lake George in collaboration with the Lake George Association. And then in 2020, we expanded to also IBM Research, can't leave them out. And we expanded in 2020 to Chautauqua Lake in collaboration with Chautauqua Institution. So we're a big team of scientists with a lot of diverse specialties. My background is in algae research, but we have people working on software engineering, computer modeling, all sorts of different aquatic ecology specialties. And a central goal of the project is to understand human impacts on fresh water. Just gonna click through all of these. Okay, so pilot research began in 2020 on Chautauqua Lake, but 2025 marked the first year of significant state funding, and so we expanded quite a bit last year. So now we have a local team of 3 of us. One of our technicians, Kira, is here as well. And before 2025, we had only studied partial seasons, but in 2025, we were able to have instrumentation out for the entire year. The tributary monitoring stations that were mentioned, those went in 2024, and we started major sampling in 2025 at those stations. So I'll get into what we found so far from those. We're working on 2 new weather stations, which I'll talk about a little bit more later. And we're always working on expanding our partnerships and working with lake organizations here. So we appreciate the opportunity to present with all these different groups. And so our goal at Chautauqua Lake is to develop a holistic understanding of water quality, looking at both the hot spots and the hot moments. So where are nutrients coming in and when are they coming in so we can better manage the lake? So our top management challenges you're probably pretty familiar with at this point, but one of them is eutrophic conditions. That just means really high nutrients. Things like nitrogen and phosphorus are at high levels in Chautauqua Lake, and they're feeding not only the macrophytes that Dr. Richardson was talking about, but also the harmful algal blooms. We have a lot of management, as you know, going on with those macrophytes, and all of this stuff is complicated by the fact that the lake is a drinking water source and it's a huge recreational resource for the region. And so for last year and this year, our major priorities and goals are developing a high-resolution nutrient budget. So you can think of that as like balancing your checkbook, but with nutrients. So we're seeing where nutrients are coming in, where they're going out, where can we pinpoint where they can be best managed. We're looking for areas of high nutrient loading throughout the watershed so that we can pinpoint management better. We're improving those tributary stations that we started. We're deploying weather stations near the north and south basins. We're doing a lot of modeling and forecasting for harmful algal blooms. Okay, so where do we stand and what do we need? So we need to make sure that the management strategies that we're proposing are effective. So that takes a lot of research, development, and testing before we can scale up to bigger projects. And a lot of mitigation efforts, not only in Chautauqua Lake, but this is a very common problem in all lakes. We're not great at monitoring them, and that's usually because of resource limitation. But as Dr. Richardson was saying with macrophyte management, it's really important to keep monitoring any management actions so that we can adapt and change if we see something unexpected. Thank you. Okay. So research optimization is essential. So we, of course, want to get the biggest bang for a buck. So if we're looking at where we can manage nutrients, where will that be most cost effective? And in a lot of lakes, these mitigation decisions are based on legacy data, but we're very lucky in Chautauqua Lake. We have Jefferson Project and lots of other groups doing research, so we have a lot of current data that we can make the best management decisions with. And of course, through all of this, collaboration and cooperation is absolutely essential to get any management projects done. All right, so I'm going to go through kind of what we did, what we surveyed this year, and then I'll get into some of our results. I keep saying this year, but it's from 2025. We're still analyzing 2025 data. Okay, so we did lake surveys in 2025 pretty extensively. We went out every 2 weeks to sample at 14 sites. You can see them all on the map there. I will point out we didn't always sample, well, down here basically at Lucille Ball Park, because we couldn't always quickly get through that big weed mat in the South Basin. We had depth resolve samples from the surface to the bottom. We collected things like nutrients, algae. We looked at the light transmission in the lake to see where plants and algae can grow to what depths. And this lake survey was very labor intensive, but it's a great complement to a lot of the sensor data that we have. So we have lots of very sophisticated sensors. They always need to be ground truthed. For our stream surveys, we have tributary stations now on 6 tributaries. These are Mud, DeWittville, Prendergast, Bemis, Ball, and Goose Creeks. And then we have another station, a smaller station on the outlet on the Chautauqua. We sample at these stations. We go and collect samples during base flow to see kind of just during typical conditions, what are the nutrient loads like. We also do some storm sampling. That luckily is automated sampling using the instrument that's shown down there on the bottom right, where we take samples during storms. Well, that machine does, and then we go drive around and collect them. We're doing stream gauging, where we're measuring water flow. And then we also have some sensors at these tributary stations that I'll talk about later. And so these sample collections are really important for model validation and for understanding what's going in to the lake from the tributaries. Our sensor network is probably what we're most well known for because it's so visible. What you might have seen on the lake is our vertical profilers. These are sensor platforms. They look like pontoon boats that are just anchored in one spot. These are custom built for high frequency data collection, so they're constantly measuring data the entire time they're out in the lake. They profile the water column from top to bottom, so there's a set of sensors that's constantly going up and down in the water. And they measure things like water velocity. They have weather stations on them, and they measure surface fluorescence, which is just a measure of algae. Our tributary stations, also as PJ mentioned, custom built by a local company. These measure water quality and quantity. They have automated samplers. We're able to run them in the winter if we need to. They're expandable, so if we decide that we need more sensors, different kinds of sensors that we didn't know we needed, we're able to add those in later. But those are constantly collecting data from the streams as well. Our weather stations, these are going in this year. These are land-based stations, one near the North Basin, one near the South Basin, very close to the lake shore. These help us measure things like wind speed and precipitation right on the lake so that we can fill in data gaps, especially when our vertical profilers are not on the lake. Because those sensor platforms, they can't stay out when there's ice on the lake. So we're filling in some data gaps there. And then that helps us also validate our weather models and do some forecasting. Something that we implemented in 2025 was that we have a live data dashboard. So you can go to that website and see some of our live sensor data. Right now, the vertical profilers aren't out on the lake right now, but when they're back in the lake, those will be added back in. And then modeling is what brings everything together. So we have people working on weather models, watershed models, which is new this year, and also hydrodynamics, which just means the water flow and water currents in the lake itself. And so these models are used to build a more complete picture and kind of integrate our data to get a better idea of what's going on. So getting into some of our preliminary results, I talked about the nutrient budget a little bit. This is figuring out where phosphorus and nitrogen are coming into the lake, how much is coming in from external sources, how much is getting recycled within the lake, and where those nutrients are being removed from the system. And so this is something we're actively working on. It has a lot of different components. So anytime I'm talking about nutrients in the rest of this presentation, those are all getting fed into this nutrient budget that we're working on. And so we're starting with just phosphorus, but then we can expand to nitrogen in the future. And so one thing that's critical is water balance. We don't have very much data on groundwater right now, so we've been working with a collaborator to get some of those data collected. We're focusing in 2026 a lot on external nutrient inputs, so that means nutrients coming in from those tributaries now that we have those stations going. And then we've worked a lot on internal nutrient dynamics, which just means recycling of these nutrients within the lake once they're already there. Something new that we started in 2025 was looking at how macrophyte removal affects nutrients. So I don't have results on this yet, but we're sending those samples out to a lab. We have collected them. So we want to see how much nitrogen and phosphorus is actually removed when macrophytes are harvested and removed from the system. We're also doing some computer modeling to see how, if sediment resuspension is affected, if there are fewer macrophytes from any management strategies. All right, so the thing that was on everyone's mind in 2025 that was all over the media, of course, was that huge weed mat down here in the South Basin. So we were asked a lot about that, about what happened there. And we did look at our data to see if we could find anything odd for this year. We thought of a few ideas of what could have happened. A couple of them we could not test because we didn't have the data. Some of them we could test, but I wanted to mention all of them. So biocontrols, so that means just things that eat the macrophytes. So things like aquatic insects that are herbivores. We do not collect data on those. I wanted to mention them because it is a possibility that their dynamics changed. Also, macrophyte management changes. We do not track those, but if there are any changes in macrophyte efforts that last year that could have had an impact. What we were able to test was looking at water temperature and nutrient dynamics to see if that could have affected things. What we found is that nutrient levels, so several different forms of nitrogen and phosphorus, and then a lot of other parameters, were pretty similar this year in 2025 as in the previous 4 years. And so we see seasonal dynamics with nutrients, but we didn't see anything that stuck out in 2025 as being really excessive. So we don't think that was the main cause of these macrophytes. What we did see, though, was that the surface water, where those macrophytes are actually growing, was a lot warmer in 2025 compared to the previous 4 years that we have data for. It also warmed up a bit faster last year, and that was probably because we had lower rainfall. We had that really dry spring and summer. And the rainwater tends to be a lot colder, but also mixes things up. So that surface water was a little bit warmer last year. We think that could have contributed. So if you're looking at temperature optima for the species that we have in the lake, things like Eurasian water milfoil really like warm water. As was mentioned, LODO was a huge problem. That does not have as high of an optimal temperature, but it could have gotten jump-started by those warmer temperatures in the spring. So that's what we think could have been going on there. Next, I'll be talking about some of the nutrient data that we collected in tributaries. We saw that nitrogen was particularly high in DeWittville Creek, and phosphorus was particularly high in Mud Creek. And then we also saw, the Goose Creek is not shown here, but we also saw that Goose Creek had a lot of nitrogen and phosphorus inputs during storms. So those 3 tributaries are probably good candidates for additional management measures. One of my colleagues has been looking at water movement between the north and south basins. That's one of the reasons we put our profilers last year kind of close to the middle of the lake so we could measure water exchange. And so he was curious whether these harmful algal blooms are actually originating in the North Basin all the time, if they're happening there, or if they're coming up from the South Basin. So we see a lot more blooms in the South Basin, but the question is, can they actually move north? Because when we think about Chautauqua Lake, the main water flow kind of moves north to south because it goes out the Chautauqua, but there can be conditions when it moves from south to north as well. So we saw that most blooms that we see in the North Basin are kind of starting there, but then we do see some instances where we get a big bloom in the South Basin, and then a day later we see that bloom in the North Basin. So looking at those data coupled with some of our water current models, we are seeing that water with the associated algae can get pushed in some conditions from the South Basin to the North Basin. We looked at toxins from cyanobacteria or blue-green algae a lot this year. What we found is that we saw cyanotoxins present usually at pretty low concentrations. The main toxin that we saw was called, well, it was a group called microcystins. Those are liver toxins. They were typically low, but we did see 4 instances in 2025 when they exceeded safety thresholds. Those were mostly in the fall. And then we recorded a different toxin called cylindrospermopsin, also a liver toxin. We recorded that once. As far as we know, that's the first time it's been recorded in Chautauqua Lake. The good news is it was at a very low level. And using some environmental DNA data, we also saw that the main species that's producing these toxins is Microcystis, which is important because we have a lot of different species of blue-green algae in Chautauqua Lake, and we think that's the main toxin producer. So you guys are all familiar with Chautauqua Lake, so you know that we have kind of a green water phase where once we get the first big bloom of the year, it tends to stay green. So that's not typical of all lakes, but we call it kind of the green water phase. So we were curious if we could actually predict when this might happen. So this is looking at just the amount of algae that we see, and we saw that changeover occur kind of at the end of June last year. And it's really hard to see in just the algae data. There's not much of a ramp up before then. But what one of my colleagues found is that there's a huge increase in the variability of the data for about a month beforehand. So that helps us kind of predict when that changeover might occur with our sensor data. We looked a lot at internal phosphorus loading. Ooh. Big buildup for phosphorus loading. Okay, are we back on? Yep. Cool, thank you. Yeah, thanks, Justin. Okay, so internal phosphorus loading. So what happens with phosphorus is that when we have a drop in oxygen, there's a chemical reaction that happens where phosphorus is released from the sediment, from the metals that it was bound to in the sediment. And so we worry about low oxygen as a contributor of phosphorus. And so we know that this happens a lot in the North Basin, in the deep spots of the North Basin, where we get summertime drops in oxygen and we get big phosphorus release. But what we found in 2025, that this is also happening in the South Basin. So thank you to the CLP for letting us borrow your phosphorus sensor. And we were able to see that there are short periods of stratification in the South Basin where we just get a few days where it's really warm and really calm, and then we get a phosphorus release. So this is something we didn't have great data on before, but it tells us that internal cycling is happening quite a bit in the South Basin as well as the North Basin. We were also able to make a computer model. We call it SYNC. It's a surrogate regression model where we can take some of our sensor data that's not nutrient data and use that to model the actual nutrient data. And it does a pretty good job. And this is very exciting because this means we can just take out handheld sensors, drop them down, and get an estimate of what nutrients are doing at a given time and place without actually measuring the nutrients, because that takes a lot of lab work to directly measure nutrients. So we get things like this where we can see differences in phosphorus in different parts of the water column at a given time. And that will be fed into our nutrient budget as well. Something that we have found with our tributary stations, we've been measuring storm dynamics at our tributary stations because we think a lot of nitrogen and phosphorus is coming in during storms. And what we find, we're looking at the nutrients. This is just different forms of nitrogen and phosphorus in the red, and then the water level in the gray. You'll notice that the red peaks always happen before the gray peaks. That means that the nutrients are coming in at the beginning of the storm. They're not usually coming in at the peak water flow, they're coming in before that. And so when we're thinking about trying to manage those tributaries, we need to catch that initial flood of rainwater rather than the peak flow. Okay, so a summary of results for 2025. We saw that surface water was a little bit warmer in 2025 than previous years. This may have contributed to the excess macrophyte growth. We do have data that indicate that algal blooms can move from south to north in Chautauqua Lake. We did observe some cyanotoxins. These were mostly at low concentrations, but there were some above safety thresholds late in the year. We were able to measure nutrients in the tributaries to support informed management decisions, so figure out where and when management strategies would be most effective. We looked at high-frequency data to help predict this changeover to the green water phase, and then we saw a lot of evidence of internal phosphorus loading in the South Basin. And so right now, we are writing up a report for our 2025 data that will be publicly available. We're also publishing all of our data. That will be on the EPA's Water Quality Exchange portal, so that's just free and open if you're interested in the raw data. We're quality checking that right now. And in 2026, we're going to work on designing and implementing some pilot mitigation projects where we can actually start to test decreasing phosphorus and nitrogen in tributaries. So I will leave it there, but thank you to our funders from New York State. Thank you to our partner, the Chautauqua Institution. The Ralph C. Sheldon Foundation funded the initial tributary stations. And thank you to all of our collaborators that we've worked on projects with. And I know I can't answer questions now, but come find me afterwards if you have any questions. Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Reisig. And just if I could remind everybody, if you have questions from our first two presenters, Dr. Dr. Richardson and or Dr. Rice, if you please raise your hand, my staff will be around to give you a card. If you please put the name of the presenter on the top of that card, we will make sure that they get it. And again, our presenters will be around afterwards for any questions you may have as well. I do like to give a shout out. We did have a plan. We were hoping that the battery would last through the transition, but unfortunately it did not. But I do like to thank my staff that is here, my Chief of Staff, James Feldman, my Secretary, Megan Austin, and my Media Information Officer, Justin Gould, for getting this together. And Justin is the tech guru behind all this, so I would like to give them a great deal of thank you, and they've really been kind of the motivating factor behind all this. All the presentations, the media blitz, everything you see was my team behind the scenes, so I'd like to thank them. Currently, right now, we're just a little bit ahead of time, which, again, respecting everybody's time and your busy weekends. But now we'd like to bring up to the podium for their presentation Chad Stanishevsky from the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation.
All right, good morning, everyone. I can't believe it's been a year already since the last time I was here. I'm assuming that's because I like to come so much that time goes by really fast. That might be it. I do feel like the DEC is a little bit less in the crosshairs this year, at least I hope, but I'm still keeping an eye out for flying objects as I did last year. So I'm gonna go through pretty quick, just a couple projects that we're working on. Some of the stuff I went over last year, we'll just provide an update on that. And then, we'll talk a little bit more and probably spend a little bit more time on the herbicide permit applications that have been submitted this year and what, if any, impediments the new wetland law has had on those applications. So Mayville PFAS, so emerging contaminants, I think we're still all aware. Several years ago, Mayville had to shut down their water supply wells because they were contaminated with PFAS. There was an alternate water supply that was brought in. They put some carbon treatment on their wells, and they started up their wells again. But the contamination still remains in the ground, which is not a great thing. And that's something that our Division of Environmental Remediation is trying to figure out exactly what's going on and how to actually address it, because we would like to address the source area rather than just addressing it at the wellhead itself. So we started a remedial investigation this summer. We actually completed the field work this summer. You can read through this. It's pretty basic in terms of what we do in remediation. We wanted to know a little bit more about the source areas, mainly behind the Chautauqua Municipal Building, which we believe is the main source area. Our geologists wanted to understand the subsurface geology, and for all the geologists out there, you guys love to collect data. The geologists that we have, they love to collect data. I always have to rein them in. They want to put in 1 million wells and collect 1 million samples to determine what's going on. I don't know why that is. Our engineers aren't the same way, but our geologists like to do that. So we do have we did collect an awful lot of data this past summer. We want to determine the nature and extent of contamination, figure out how it's actually migrating to the drinking water wells, and then determine remedial options, how to prevent that, and hopefully remove it at the source if that's possible. So our investigation this summer, the work that's already been completed, we installed or completed 53 soil borings. Out of those soil borings, we collected about 250 soil samples to analyze them for PFAS and other emerging contaminants. We installed 30 new wells, both in the overburden and in the bedrock, to actually sample the groundwater. And then we collected surface water samples and sediment samples at 11 locations. So that's a pretty good data set to determine what's going on. This summer, we will be evaluating that data. We will be coming up with remedial alternatives and costs associated with those remedial alternatives, hopefully so that we can remove some of the source area and or mitigate the migration to the actual drinking water wells. So that work's going pretty well. I haven't heard any complaints about the work we're doing. I am working closely with our remediation staff in order to make sure that they are moving along with this, but that's an update for that. And then here you can see, you can probably place yourself better than me, but this is some of the work we did and where we installed monitoring wells. Up at the top is the Town of Chautauqua Municipal Building, and we installed a series of monitoring wells all the way down almost to Chautauqua Lake. The dreaded wetland regulations. So last year, there was a lot of anxiety relative to the wetland regulations. Most things that, or most projects that result in a lot of controversy make their way to me. Things that don't result in a lot of controversy don't make their way to me. So for Chautauqua Lake, I don't know exactly from your perspective how the wetland regulations have impacted what you're trying to do. I have not been involved in a lot of site-specific issues or project-specific issues relative to how the wetland regulations are really impeding necessary projects. I'll take that as a good sign. I'm sure there is some anxiety relative to that, and I'm sure there are some obstructions relative to some projects, but in general, I hope the well-placed hysteria last year at the time didn't come true relative to the wetland regulations. I suppose after this, if you have questions, you can let me know, and nobody's yelling anything out at this point in time. So hopefully it didn't have the impact that you thought it would have had last year when I was here. So in general, my understanding is about a month ago, our central office has received about 10,000 requests for parcel jurisdictional determinations, which is where you essentially send your tax map information to central office and you ask them if there is the potential for wetlands to be on your property. Statewide, we've received about 10,000 of those. That was about a month ago, so there's probably a little bit more. We've processed about 8,500 of those jurisdictional determinations. So it's a lot of work and a lot of workload relative to this. And that's really the easy part. It's the follow-up, the wetland delineations, and the permitting that takes us some time. So please have some patience. We are backlogged in the region a little bit doing delineations and permit issuance. We are moving through that as quickly as possible. So just have a little patience with us. But in order to try to streamline the process, and what I'm going to talk a little bit about today, very high level, are the general permits that have been issued since last year. And you might ask, well, what's the difference between a general permit and an individual permit? So a general permit is really very specific to your activity. If your activity that you want to do is not expected to have a significant impact on the wetland, you can apply for a general permit. Essentially, each general permit's a little bit different, but essentially you would look at the general permit, make sure your project falls within the realm of that general permit. You can then skip the parcel jurisdictional determination process, sending your information to Albany. That could save you 90 days. You can submit the general permit coverage, request for coverage under the general permit application directly to our regional office. Much easier for us to process. We will look to make sure that your project actually falls under there. There are conditions relative to that general permit that you'll have to follow. You have to acknowledge that you're going to follow those conditions. And then we can essentially issue verification that your project's covered under that general permit. There's no comment period that would be associated with an individual permit. So it's just a lot quicker, right? It's not the end-all, be-all to wetland permitting, but it's a lot quicker if your project falls underneath one of these general permits. So there's a number of general permits. I'm going to talk about 3 of them that are most applicable. A lot of the other general permits are relative to energy projects and energy siting projects, but the ones most applicable to Chautauqua Lake, freshwater wetland permit, that's really for any freshwater wetland. And again, if it's repair or replacement of existing structures, construction or modification of existing residential or commercial, industrial, public structures, temporary installation of access road and laydown areas. You can read the rest of these. If you have a project that's pretty simple like that, it's going to be temporary in nature, or you're just modifying something that's already there and it's not going to have a big impact on the wetland, you very well may be able to just submit for coverage under this general permit to us, and it's usually pretty quick that we can turn that around. There's a lakes and shoreline general permit, which would certainly be applicable to at least Chautauqua Lake. I don't have to read all of these. If you can see, it talks about docks, boathouses, existing in-kind replacement, installation of dry hydrants or water lines, new navigational dredging. Again, there are conditions relative to this. You have to make sure your project falls within the realm of what these permits cover, but if they do, it's a pretty simple process to get a permit. And then the last one, and this one has not been issued yet. There was an invasive species permit even before, or general permit even before the new wetland regulations came in. When the new wetland regulations came in, they retracted that to make it more general and cover more things so that more things would be covered under that general permit. But again, here you'll see where it says aquatic pesticides. It doesn't mean any aquatic pesticides. If they're new applications, I believe they have to be under an acre in size. It will allow for existing applications that have occurred repeatedly and within the past 4 years. Those could be covered under the general permit. Not really going to apply to what we're doing mostly on Chautauqua Lake because we're changing things to try to make things a little bit better each year, both administratively, process-wise, as well as what we're actually trying to accomplish with the herbicide permits. But some of this stuff is covered under this invasive species permit. So again, if you have any projects, really look first to see if it can be covered under one of these general permits. It'll be much, much easier for you. And then you can just go online and search DEC wetland regulations, and you'll have a whole host of information on wetland permitting and general permits. So you heard a lot about nutrient management today, and I think this is good. One of the benefits that I have seen, and again, I don't live around Chautauqua Lake, I live in Springville, so this is really, really your lake to manage. I view DEC's role as trying to help you achieve what you're trying to achieve, and even 3 years ago, I think the presentations that you saw, they were a little bit more disjointed. There really wasn't kind of a vision on where people were taking the lake. There was a lot of arguments. None of the lake groups could really get along with one another 3 years ago, and we would get hundreds of, somebody wants to do something, we'd get hundreds of comment letters. We don't want them to do that. Someone wanted to do the exact opposite, we'd get 100 comment letters. We don't want them to do that either. So that's difficult to actually move stuff forward. What I can see this year, and we've had meetings, and I have meetings with the lake groups, whether they're being a little bit more pushed into getting along or whether they are actually trying to get along to move things forward, and I hope it's the latter or the previous will achieve the latter. They do seem to be getting along a lot better, and I think that's great for Chautauqua Lake, and it makes our job a lot easier in what we're doing because we're not spending a lot of time what I feel is moderating the different factions on Chautauqua Lake. A lot more effort could be put into what's doing right and moving things forward. So relative to nutrient management, a lot of our central office staff are covering a lot of this, and I don't get overly involved. But some of this is going to be actionable things that we're doing, and some of this is going to be studying. And no offense to anybody at the table or the DEC, but when I hear somebody's going to study something, I tend to roll my eyes, and then I get up and go to the bathroom, or I get a cup of coffee, because we started this conversation by saying Chautauqua Lake has been the most studied lake, but yet we're all still doing studies, right? So from your perspective, what I would like you to hold us to at the DEC, as well as everybody else at this table, is it's fine to do studies, and you have to do studies to come to an end. But if 5 years from now we're still talking about doing studies, I think something went horribly wrong. So I can't control what anybody else does except what the DEC does. So when I talk about nutrient loading and internal nutrient loading, and when I talk about TMDL implementation strategies in every one of our meetings, and it's probably because I'm not smart enough to understand all the graphs and all the data and everything else, but in every one of those meetings, I'm like, how is this going to get us to a project? Like, what are we going to do? Like, if this ends up just being another report that goes on the shelf, that would be the worst case scenario, because you spend a bunch of money doing nothing. And the consultants are rolling their eyes thinking, how am I going to make money if you're just trying to get to an endpoint and go point A to point B? But Studies are important. You have to do studies, but you have to hold people responsible, especially the government, in making sure that those studies result in actionable projects. So some of this that I'll talk about, you'll roll your eyes, understandably so. Other things are a little bit more actionable. I prefer to deal with the more actionable things. So this is actionable, right? Like this is, so sewering around Chautauqua Lake. I don't personally get involved in a lot of that, but there's been a lot of work and a lot of progress done in sewering around Chautauqua Lake. That's an actionable thing with a very viable outcome. You know, leaky septic systems that aren't working, you're eliminating all of that. So we're studying phosphorus, but this is eliminating phosphorus sources. We know that it is. My understanding, and some here probably know better than me, is that there's really only one phase left to do, and then the entirety of Chautauqua Lake will be sewered. That's phase 3, which is to the upper right-hand corner in red over there. That still needs to be sewered. About 400 developed properties, 68 undeveloped properties, at a cost of $36 million. It's obviously not cheap. It's a ton of money, but I'd rather spend $36 million on doing a project than spend $1 million on a study. So to me, that's well spent. In terms of state investment in and around Chautauqua Lake, in order to help push some of these actionable projects forward, these are just some of the grants that were awarded for 2025. You can see that for the phase 3 sewer extension, there was about $18 million provided, so that covers about half the cost of that. My understanding is this is moving. This last phase is in the planning, almost in the construction phase. So that's awesome. Who's ever associated with those projects should be proud that you've actually pushed those forward over the last, I don't know, decade or more. So TMDL Watershed Implementation Plan. So this is something that we're working on. And to be honest with you, 2 years ago, I had no idea what a TMDL implementation plan was because I dealt with remediation, not water quality issues. But this is something that DEC is working. Some of it's studying, and some of it's doing what we can to be a little bit more proactive. And really, you know, for TMDL, it comes up with a maximum daily limit for phosphorus in the lake. We all want to reduce phosphorus because we know that increases vegetation growth. So the study is really meant to figure out why we have not yet achieved the TMDL, which is supposed to be the maximum daily limit for phosphorus of 20 micrograms per liter in the lake. We're still above that. In 2012, we came up with the TMDL for phosphorus. It is, I don't know, 14 years later, and we still haven't met it. So really, it's determined why aren't we meeting that, and where more are these inputs of phosphorus? And this is where some of the studies are important, because we can't treat the entire lake. It's too big, right? So if we're doing internal loading studies to figure out, it's not just to determine that and this is the way it's explained to me, and I'm gonna hold people to this, but it's not just to determine, you know, hey, how much loading is coming from that's a study that doesn't act, but it's to determine where are the discrete areas that have the most internal loading so that we can actually reasonably address those areas, right? We know we can't address the whole lake. We can't dredge the whole lake. We can't treat the whole lake. It's too big. It'd be too costly. So those are the kind of things that I try to hold at least our folks accountable for and to explain to me on how we're trying to achieve that. Also, for the TMDL, there's other things that we're doing. So we have what we call PCI Speedies permits. They're private commercial industrial permits that we give to smaller facilities, campgrounds, you know, a hotel that may not be able to be a commercial facility, like a hotel that may not be able to be connected to a municipal sewer system. They have a septic system that's discharging to the groundwater or the surface water. And we haven't gotten to inspect a lot of those facilities because we're dealing with much larger facilities and much larger commercial businesses that aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing. And I can name, if anybody's heard of Issaquah Creek, hasn't gone well for us. A lot of our time is spent on big facilities, and we haven't had time to inspect these little facilities, but they're contributors. So we are putting a lot of effort in the Chautauqua Lake watershed to finally go out to these facilities and inspect them. And it's not always great. We went to one facility, I won't name the names, and their septic system was completely plugged. And essentially all of their septic water was blowing out of a clean out, running directly into a creek. And this is what we see when we go out to facilities, right? Absolutely taking enforcement, absolutely gonna address the issue. And I'm sure there's more of them out there. But that's something actionable that we can do to, again, prevent phosphorus and other nutrients from getting into the creek. So we're really trying to do that with the staff that we have. We have also sent out, our central office folks mainly have sent out to lake organizations and other people doing research on the lake on we don't have an inventory. Like we said, we're not keeping track of projects that have been done or other projects that really have to be done. So we sent out a request for information relative to projects that have been done and projects that should be done relative to reducing phosphorus. We've gotten responses from those back. From that outreach back. We're trying to organize that to, again, figure out, at least get an inventory of what's out there. That's a little bit of studying, but then in the end, I think it's gonna really help us kind of figure, like, maybe all the work's been done over here and we need to look over here. We're gonna try to figure that out. We're doing an internal loading study, and if I was you sitting in that chair looking at us, I would say, is DEC studying the Jefferson Project's internal loading, or is the Jefferson Project studying DEC's internal loading? Because it seems like there's a lot of studies going on relative to internal loading. And are we duplicating what we're doing? Are we both working on separate parts to kind of inform that whole study better? The answer is yes and yes, I think, to some degree. But we have started meeting with the Jefferson Project to figure out what we're duplicating and to stop doing it so that they can focus on things that they're doing that supplement what we're doing and vice versa, so we can figure out what's happening. I'm really interested in the work that they're doing because I'd like to know how many nutrients and at what time of the year are most of those nutrients coming down the tributaries into Chautauqua Lake. I don't have a handle on that. And we're both studying internal loading a little bit, but we are trying to get our ducks in a row to make sure we're not duplicating services or duplicating efforts, because that would be ridiculous. I don't have to go into this. They talked a lot about it already. One of the things we did do is we did a pretty decent bathymetric survey of the depths of Chautauqua Lake. That hasn't been done in a while. We're still putting that data together. This is one thing, maybe all of you knew this, but there's a shipwreck in the bottom of Chautauqua Lake. There you go, in the North Basin, but this is kind of this was just something that came out of our survey, but we will be coming out publicly with the survey that has the depths in Chautauqua Lake across the lake. We'll be using that again in terms of our internal loading study and to help inform some of our future projects. But if you're ever looking for this kind of data, it should be coming out hopefully by the end of this year. Our internal loading study, we collected a lot of data last year. That's being analyzed by our consultants. We hope a report's going to be out by the end of this year as well. Herbicide permits. So I work more closely with this. So herbicide permits, we've done things a little bit different this year. And each year we're trying to improve, right? But a lot of the bureaucracy and the administrative implementations of permitting got in our way to do things when we wanted to, and it was always late. Herbicide applications were late. After vegetation came to full growth, that leads to dead and dying vegetation, which then leads to a whole host of issues that I don't really have to discuss because you are well aware of it, I am sure. So what we're trying to do this year, instead of doing only, hey, one permit, we're gonna do one permit for Eurasian milfoil, and it's gonna be in June, right? We're structuring the permits so up to 2 treatments can be done. So if they do 1 treatment because it wasn't growing here early in the season, they can then move into a second treatment without public comment, without jumping through all of the hoops in order to do that. I think that will be tremendous in helping to move this forward and make it a little bit more workable, because whether you're for herbicide applications or you're completely against it, I think we can all agree if you're gonna do it, you might as well do it right. And that's, again, we are a bureaucracy in the state. We have our permitting and our administrative things, but we're trying to structure it so that it's as flexible as possible, so that, especially for invasive species, we can provide that flexibility. So this is what was applied for. We did not issue any permits. I'm not telling anybody here, including CLP, that they're going to get all of this because we have to review it to make sure it conforms with our regulations. Most of it will be permitted, but this is what they asked for. 11 total sites. This is for clearcast for pondweed. They have tier 1 this year, tier 2 sites. So essentially, we're also being a little bit flexible in saying, listen, we go out with you before you treat. If it's there, we allow you to treat it. If it's not there, we don't allow you to treat it. So why are we very rigid at the beginning saying we can only treat here when we don't really know where the hell it's going to grow? So why don't we be a little bit more flexible? Tier 1, this is where we think it's going to grow, and this is where we're going to focus on. But these tier 2 sites are where maybe it's going to pop up there, or maybe it pops up there a little bit more randomly. The tier 2 sites are where we will still be able to permit without jumping through all the hoops to, again, give a little bit more flexibility. So we're doing that different this year. Pondweed has to be treated by April 30th because there is a Hills pondweed, which is a rare, threatened, and endangered pondweed that you cannot kill by regulation, or you can't do things to kill. Hills pondweed grows a little bit later. We were asked by Chautauqua Lake Partnership, who is actually submitting the permits. They're not going to be submitted by the municipalities anymore because the municipalities had problems signing permits and getting resolutions and doing all of that, which again slowed the process down. So it's not to give CLP more control, it's just to provide more flexibility so that they can move through this a little bit more timely. We may push that out to May 15th because of the heavy ice cover. Still talking to our staff about that, but there may be a little bit of flexibility there. So you can see where they're going to treat. It's pretty self-explanatory. The fish exclusion zones, I will again apologize to anybody who lives or has a house adjacent to the fish exclusion zones. It sucks for you, honestly. I understand that. It's one of those things that my mother would always say, life isn't fair, and I do feel bad for you at this point in time. We are going to try to work with CLP to see what we can do to kind of alleviate some of that, but we have to have some areas in the lake. Our job is to make sure the lake is still being managed in a way that supports the natural resources. I think we can all agree with that. That's how we're doing that this year. Per Celoron, this is for Eurasian milfoil. Essentially, it's the same thing. You can see tier 1, tier 2. There's 944 acres in total, but they will only treat up to 600 acres. They probably won't even treat 600 acres because they usually never treat as much as they think they're going to treat. Again, 2 treatments for this because Eurasian milfoil grows a little bit differently throughout the year. But you can see where they're going to treat for Eurasian milfoil. Starry stonewort. Again, there's been some suction harvesting work that's been done. My understanding, they're having a little hard time keeping up with it. I don't know if that's true, but that's what I heard through the grapevine. But there's a lot of pilot studies happening to try to figure out how to deal with starry stonewort before it becomes prolific like pondweed or milfoil, right? And this year, we are going to allow, or it looks like we're going to allow, again, none of this has been permitted, to try to treat starry stonewort with herbicides. We haven't done that in the past. There's some literature, very sketchy literature, that says it doesn't work or it doesn't work great. As regulators, we can't say, hey, that's sketchy research, so you can't do this. So most likely, we're going to allow these pilot studies to treat starry stonewort. One area, I believe, is here in front of the hotel. I don't know that we've ever really found starry stonewort there, so that's a little bit odd to me. But the other area is just across the lake where I do believe there is an infestation of starry stonewort. So we're going to try it. It's going to be a pilot study. I do believe Dr. Richardson said that, yeah, maybe we should try this, right? It'd be worth at least trying to see if it works. So we're going to try to do that in a controlled manner. Something else new this year that those of you who boat probably will be happy to hear is that we will be approving permits for non-select herbicides, right? Selective herbicides for invasive species are easier for us to permit under the wetland law because it's an invasive species, right? Whether it's been here 100 years or not, it gives us a little bit more flexibility. It's an invasive species, and it's not really natural, and we're supposed to be, pushing towards developing a natural state. Non-select herbicides that kill everything, native and invasive species, are a little bit more difficult to permit, and our staff are not as inclined to permit that because it has more of an impact on the wetland. But if it's de minimis, we do have the ability to permit that. So new for this year, what CLP applied for are these ideas of navigational herbicides for commercial marinas, right? Only commercial marinas. There's no exemption for non-commercial marinas. So that's, there's a realm of docking and things that people say may or may not apply. So we're going to be looking at the 12 sites that they propose to treat with these non-select herbicides. There will also be, if you look down there at the bottom, there will also be navigation channels, which I think is a great thing. I hope somehow somebody around here figures out how to make those apparent to boaters so they know they're there and they can avoid those. I don't know whether that's buoying or whatever. That falls outside of my realm, but it sounds like a good idea. But we'll also be allowing, at least to some degree, that navigation channel. So those are really some of the big things we've done. Now, we did get a comment letter from the, we get a lot of comment. We didn't get a lot of comment letters this year, thank you, but we did get some against herbicide treatments. Again, we always say thank you. If you're just like, I don't like herbicides, we shouldn't be using them, you're killing the lake. I can't act on that. But we do get comment letters that are very specific to certain things. And the consortium sent a very detailed comment letter about these non-select herbicides, mainly relative to starry stonewort and where it exists. And should we be doing this along a navigation channel that could essentially help propagate, the spread of starry stonewort. We're looking very closely at that. We forward that to CLP. They're going to need to address some of those concerns, and they're just very isolated areas. But we love comment letters like that, and we do act upon comment letters when it's something we can actually act upon. Last, I guess some good information, maybe a little bit of concerning information from our fisheries folks. That's, a muskie that came out of Chautauqua Lake last year in some of the egg harvesting and surveys that our fisheries folks do. If you can read this, I can barely read it from here, so you probably can't, but for muskie, the adult muskellunge population was above long-term averages in 2025. 44% of the muskies collected in 2025 were over 40 inches. And the largest muskie sampled was 50 inches, which I'm assuming that's a picture of, and it weighed over 30 pounds. Walleye abundance remains above the long-term average. With walleye, however, there is a concern, in all honesty, that the propagation of walleye over the last couple of years has not been great. They're not seeing a lot of new walleye in the lake, which is something concerning, obviously. It happens from time to time, just natural fluctuations, right? But we're watching it because that's what we're supposed to do. So the populations are still good, but they're watching like the young of year and some of the smaller fish, and they have seemed to decline over the last several years. My understanding, they've seen a little bit of that with the muskie too, but not to the same degree. Bass are still doing good, panfish are still doing great. If you want to learn more about, if you're a fisherman and you want to learn more about the walleye populations, our fisheries folks are having two public events. You can see them here, March 24th, Carlson Community Center, and then March 25th at the Lawson Center from 6:30 to 8 p.m. on both nights. You can go there and talk to our fisheries folks about the fishery, good or bad, the management of Chautauqua Lake, whatever. They're instructed not to talk about a lot of the other stuff we've talked about today, just so we don't have different information out there. But they would love to talk about the fishery in Chautauqua Lake. So that's all I have for you. I have no idea how I did on time, but I guess we'll ask questions after the fact.
Thank you, Chad. So, one of the things, if you listen to the beginning, the diversity of the DEC, they have so many things that they're covering. And really, we do like to thank Chad and Julia. They've had a tremendous amount of input here with our teams and listening to everyone. It's so diverse and it's so dynamic. Again, if you have any questions for Chad, please raise your hand. Our staff will be around to hand out those cards. Really, one of the things, as I said, has been very flexible now is pivoting for our marinas. Uniquely enough, Chautauqua County decided that we wanted to be part of Viewpoint from Dennis Quaid. So we have a national film crew that came down here and did filmed 3 different areas about Chautauqua County. We wanted to highlight. Those will be airing shortly if they're not already airing as we speak. But unfortunately, they came down here to the Harbor Hotel to do some filming and was abruptly halted based on the excessive amount of weeds and the smell, et cetera. So we are focusing every year on these issues. I do want to thank David Hart and the staff here at the Harbor Hotel, Deandra and her staff. Please give them a round of applause. We've met several times with David and his partners here. This parcel of property laid vacant for 60 years. And it was the vision of David and his group to create one of the masterpiece hotels that he's had in multiple occasions across New York State. So we do thank them for their investment and their concern as we move forward. But again, really excited. But it shows the flexibility of the DEC and the ability to work with our lake organizations. They spoke again about the water, wetlands regulations. So Chautauqua County, we're focused on that 13,000 acre body of water behind us. But unfortunately, across the state, Westchester County has a different look, and so does Onondaga. Onondaga's concern now is that $100 billion investment over 20 years of Micron, finding out that 1,500 acres they're trying to develop now possibly has wetlands. So imagine trying to bring in a worldwide company and the governor and everyone is touted this project only to find out there may be some hiccups with the wetland regulations. So we all have different concerns, and these regulations are not the same. I tell everyone New York State's consistently inconsistent. And we find again that the regulation as it appears to the Chautauqua County residents is a greater concern than most, but a completely different concern with somebody from Onondaga County and the expansion and the production and construction of a larger project. So again, we do thank Chad and his abilities to work across the gamut of what we do. At this time, we are a little bit ahead of schedule, but again, respecting everyone, not too bad. But again, we would like to, at this time, bring up one of our local stakeholders, which is a position we took on this year's symposium to make sure that their information is being shared and sharing everyone with what they do. So at this time, I'd like to introduce Whitney Gleason, representing the Chautauqua Watershed Conservancy.
All right, we'll see if I can get through this without coughing. All right, does this guy have a laser pointer? Nope, okay. Good morning, everyone, and thank you all so much for being here. If I have to take a minute to cough or put in a cough drop, I apologize for the distraction, but my name is Whitney Gleason, and for those of you who don't know me, I'm the executive director of the Chautauqua Watershed Conservancy. And I grew up here on Chautauqua Lake, and as so many of us do, I left the area to go to school and start my career. And it really wasn't until I went away for school that I realized what an important part of who I am this lake is. Chautauqua Lake is a part of my identity. And I'm guessing that it's also a part of your identity, even though you may not have thought of it that way before. This really struck me the first time I came home for break. And I went to school in Ohio, and I can remember reaching the point in that drive where I hit the bridge. And I remember looking out over the water and taking a breath and thinking, oh, I'm home. And I loved college. It wasn't that I was sad or anything like that to be at school, but it's just that moment of belonging, and you're going through a big life change and coming to some place where you feel you really belong. And it was in that moment that I really realized what this place meant to me and what an integral part of this place Chautauqua Lake is. This lake is part of our daily lives in ways that we often don't think about. It supports our drinking water, our economy, and the places we gather. The lake the lake is also a part of a much broader ecosystem that includes our fish, our birds, our pollinators, our forests, our floodplains, our wetlands, our tributaries, and so on and so on and so on. In an ecosystem, all of these things, people, wildlife, water, and land, are connected. They function or fail as a system, and so we, as a community, need to start taking a systems-level approach to restoring the health and well-being and protecting our lake. We are experiencing weed growth, more frequent harmful algal blooms, and threats from emerging invasive species. We know that this is because there are too many nutrients moving through the system. You've heard a lot about this today. I was hoping to have a laser pointer to help point out things in this diagram, but those nutrients we know are coming from two places. The first is external loading, so on the shores of our water body here. Sediment and nutrients coming from our lake's tributaries or from runoff that flows over the land and then directly into the lake. The second is what we call internal loading, down in the water. So these are all of the nutrients that are already in our lake from centuries of external loading and the life cycles of the plants and animals that live in the lake. Climate change is causing more extreme weather events, including periods of drought that harden the soil and actually make it harder for it to absorb water, followed by stronger rain events that cause flooding and washouts that carry more runoff and sediments and nutrients across the land and into the lake. I'm sure that if you were around last Easter, you probably remember looking out and seeing actual rivers of mud flowing through the lake from that washout event. Across our landscapes, our natural systems that once slowed and filtered our water have been altered or lost due to development. For example, we are just now, as you were hearing from Chad, completing the sewer project on our lake, when for over 200 years, we had people living on these shores using inadequate septic systems that contributed to this nutrient and sediment loading. So this isn't about one source or one decision. It's the result of many small changes over time across the landscape. And that means that the path forward is also shared. I've always found it interesting. Today we've used the word management a lot, but we often use the word maintenance when we're referring to the work that takes place in the lake year after year. And so in preparing for this presentation, I actually decided to look up what the definition of maintenance was. Maintenance is the essential process of preserving equipment, systems, or property in an optimal operating state. I would be willing to go out on a limb that most of the people in this room would agree that our lake is not currently functioning in an optimal operating state. So first, let's stop pretending that we are maintaining something and start referring to harvesting and herbicides as what they're currently functioning as, which is mitigation. And that is not a negative. I don't mean that as a negative. It's just us as a community being honest with the language that we're using to talk about what we're actually doing. We absolutely need those strategies. They just can't fix the problem alone. Instead, we need a systems-level approach for a systems-level problem. We need and will likely always need the strategic use of harvesting and targeted herbicide treatments in order to balance the ecological health and recreational needs of our community. But unless we want to spend more and more time and money on maintenance, on maintaining a status that we're not happy with, then we need to start thinking bigger and working as a team to equally prioritize the balance between mitigation strategies, restoration strategies, and preventative strategies. And as Chad said, we're making progress. We have the people coming to the table. We're all meeting each other where we're at. We don't all agree on everything yet, but we're making progress. We know that the health of the lake is shaped by everything that happens across the land around it. Our lake reflects the choices we have made throughout the watershed, and it will continue to reflect those choices. The health of the system is something that we all shape together. At the Chautauqua Watershed Conservancy, we are working to approach the health of our lake as stewards of a connected system. Land, water, and community are not separate. They shape each other. So our work brings together science, stewardship, and community to take action. You'll see that in the 4 connected ways that we work within this system. First, we protect, caring for the lands that protect our waters, or as PJ likes to say, we wear our bike helmets. We restore through projects and programs that strengthen those natural systems I was talking about. We defend using monitoring and responses and fast response to detect and remove invasive species. And we equip, empowering people throughout our community to be a part of the approach. So I'm excited to share a little bit more about how we're focusing on each of these things this year. First, we start by protecting the places that naturally support water quality. When these systems are intact, they do a remarkable amount of work quietly and consistently. Through conservation and long-term stewardship, we ensure that these landscapes continue to function in ways that support both ecosystem health and community well-being. So there are key properties that across the watershed that play an outsized role in shaping water quality and ecosystem health. They do more than some other properties do because of what's on the land, what's covering the land, where they're located in proximity to water, all of those things. And so through our strategic conservation mapping, we have decided to focus our land protection efforts on these specific properties. And this year, those efforts are culminating, resulting in the largest land campaign in our 36 years as an organization, where we will be doubling the amount of our protected lands in the Chautauqua region. This work will conserve over 1,000 new acres through a balance of new nature preserves and conservation easements. And I want to highlight that balance because it's really important, because it provides the strongest protections for our most vulnerable landscapes without hurting the county's tax base. This campaign means cleaner water, more access, and climate resilience for our communities. Caring for these places now helps ensure that the natural systems we rely on are functioning really well into the future. Next, we restore. In many areas, these natural systems have been impacted by development, invasive species, and a changing climate. We work to strengthen and improve them using both ecological knowledge and practical design. We're not trying to return the landscape to some single point in its history. That's not what restoration is in this context. Rather, we're combining science, observation, expertise, and long-term care to support systems so that they can function well today and into the future. One of the most exciting, or that I'm most excited about, restoration projects that we have happening this year is the design and construction of a smart engineered wetland on Goose Creek. Goose Creek is a major tributary to Chautauqua Lake, so the condition of this stream directly affects the health of our lake. And while we've protected it at its outlet, most of the creek flows through rural and agricultural landscapes where it picks up nutrients and sediments along the way. This project works with that reality and transforms a disturbed section of land into a system that slows water down so that it can drop its suspended sediments, allowing for natural filtration and improving how water moves through the landscape before finally reaching the lake. It's also a wonderful opportunity for partnership. The Jefferson Project has, oh, she's not there anymore. She's back there. The Jefferson Project has great tributary data from upstream that will hopefully help us better understand the impact of this project. Like Allison was saying, sometimes from a capacity standpoint, we know the science behind these projects, but it's hard to see the data of their actual true quantitative impact. So we're really excited to partner on that front and to help design the project better based on what they've already seen in their data. Like she was saying, it's the water right at the beginning of those washouts that we need to capture rather than peak storm flow. How are we using that to inform our design here on this project? We will also be continuing to clean up the log jams that impact safe navigation of the lake's tributaries and cause costly local flooding during our storm events. And after clearing those waterways, we go in and we revegetate those stream banks, making them more stable and so that they are less likely to erode during those heavy rains. This is what it looks like to pair science with stewardship, understanding how the system works, and then supporting it in ways that benefit both the lake and our surrounding community. Next, we defend while working to prevent further damage and restore our natural system. We're also paying really close attention to what's happening in the lake itself. Through ongoing aquatic invasive species monitoring, we're building a clearer understanding of how the system is changing and what new threats are emerging. This year, we will continue this program where experienced staff get out on the water to identify and remove early emerging harmful aquatic invasive species, including water chestnut, hydrilla, brittle naiad, and about a dozen other invasives that have been found just hours from Chautauqua Lake, but thankfully have not been able to establish a stronghold here yet, and we want to keep it that way. For starry stonewort, our team will continue to partner. This is an area where we're seeing great partnership across all of the organizations, state, federal, well, I don't know what Army Corps is doing, but state and all of our local organizations, in addition to the Chautauqua Lake and Watershed Management Alliance and AJ, some really great partnership happening there, and we will continue to partner and help lead that local monitoring and response effort this season. So this work is about staying informed, responding thoughtfully, and protecting the lake as conditions evolve. Finally, and importantly, we equip. This work extends beyond just projects. It includes people. Through programs like Yard Smarts, we work with homeowners and residents across the watershed. We help connect choices like lawn care, planting, shoreline management, and help people understand how that impacts the health of the lake so that we are working in community towards this systems level approach. We're also so happy and excited to be working with the kids that PJ mentioned and their program, Chautauqua Kids Care. It's just an incredible, inspiring group of young people, and we're so happy to be partnering with them and helping support their efforts through some funding for these dreams and ideas that these incredible kiddos come up with. We all need to start thinking like those kids, outside the box, from a fresh perspective, with the goal of our Yard Smarts program is also, I forgot to mention, is also a free program. Thanks to grant funding provided by the Chautauqua Lake and Watershed Management Alliance. And that program has had over 1,000 individuals from Chautauqua County participate. And if you are not one of them, please call us. Our aquatic invasive species early detection program that I was mentioning also not only puts expert eyes on the water to facilitate early detection of new threats, but it also functions as a floating classroom where we take other lake users out with us so that they also know what to be on the lookout for. When people understand how their actions connect to the system, stewardship becomes shared, where small actions multiplied across the community can really have a meaningful impact. Our goal as an organization is to stop working in isolated ways. I hope you've felt a theme of partnership, a theme of working across systems in interconnected ways as I go through our work here. We're caring for a connected system by protecting key landscapes, strengthening natural processes through restoration projects, monitoring and responding to change, and supporting informed community action. This is what stewardship looks like at a watershed scale. This is what systems-level thinking looks like. The health of Chautauqua Lake is not something that one organization or one person can determine. And I hope today inspires all of you to be a part of the work that we need to do as a community if we want to turn this lake around. Through thinking bigger and working as a team to equally prioritize the balance between mitigation, restoration, and prevention. When we care for the land and water together, we're not just protecting the lake. We're sustaining the systems that support our communities, our economy, our environment, and our shared future together. And that level of forward, strategic, systems-level thinking is what it's going to take to move us from mitigation to true maintenance. Thank you all so much for coming today, and thank you for caring about our lake.
Thank you so much, Whitney. At this time, we'd also like to call up a man who is no stranger to the microphone, nor an audience, especially when it comes to here in Chautauqua County. At this time, we'd like to ask one of the newest members of the Chautauqua Lake Partnership, our former state assemblyman, former county executive, Mr. Andy Goodell.
So a little background and then a warning. I grew up with 4 brothers in a small log cabin on Chautauqua Lake. And we spent our entire formative years in, on, or next to the lake. And it was about 1/3 each. And then in the 70s, I took some courses in limnology and had the good fortune of spending an entire summer swimming around this lake examining macrophytes, fancy word for weeds. So that's a little bit of my background, and as PJ mentioned, newly joined the board of the Chautauqua Lake Partnerships. Now the warning. For several years in a row, I had the dubious distinction of saying more words on the floor of the assembly than any other assemblyman in the state of New York. But with great restraint, I'm going to try to get you out sometime this week. Chautauqua Lake Partnership. That name's not an accident. We view our role as being a partner. And as you've hopefully gotten a sense, there are a lot of players doing a lot of great things. Whether it's soil and water conservation, working directly with our agricultural community to reduce runoff, Lake Association, CLA. I note that we have Randall Perry with the Alliance back there. Jim Wolferts, who's Executive Director of the Chautauqua Lake Property Owners Association, John Ford, the Chair of the Board for the CLA. It is a collaborative effort, and that collaboration is at a new and higher level than ever before. Our goal is to maximize the beneficial use of Chautauqua Lake. And that's a very broad goal that encompasses all the aspects of the lake. We started herbicide application in 2018 because we felt an additional tool would be helpful in addressing lake management. As part of that, we did acquire specialized equipment to measure phosphate, and it was mentioned by the Jefferson Project, we lent our equipment to them to facilitate their efforts. Our activities, by the way, have been coordinated and guided from the scientific level by Solitude Lake Management and subsequently by Ready Scout Consulting. Those are nationally recognized consulting firms with expertise in aquatic management. And we've worked very closely with North Carolina State University, who you heard from earlier. So this will give you a little bit idea. We don't just hop in a boat someday and say, it's time to treat herbicides. The process starts actually with a long-term plan. We've been working very closely with North Carolina. We do a macrophyte survey every year, both before we apply and after we apply, so we can monitor the impact. We work closely with the DEC and other partners to identify what species of macrophytes we should be focusing on. And as was mentioned earlier, just recently we've started focusing more on curly leaf pondweed. We then go through the permitting process. That is extensive. The DEC, you'll be glad to know, requires extensive data from us. They do their own analysis, they get their own data, and from that, we usually apply for a lot more than they grant us, but that's part of the overall process. And then finally, the application. And I'll talk about that a little bit because that's changing as we move forward. We've seen some, I don't need to tell you too much about this. We had pictures of, birds standing on the weeds out front. It was a tough year. And for a lot of different reasons, I'm sure. But I want to focus a little bit on what we're looking on for 2026. And this, in my opinion, is really, really great and exciting news for all of us. A few months ago, the Chautauqua Lake Partners hosted a meeting with the DEC. Our regional director came down. Chad was there. CLA was there. We had representatives as well from the Watershed Conservancy. And we focused on changing the way we approach lake management from our perspective. And we have moved from a very rigid regulatory framework where we were given a very limited time frame and a very specific location to what we refer to as adaptive management. And all of you who are familiar with growing, whether you have a garden or you have friends who are in the agricultural field or whatever, you all know that every year the plants grow at different rates at different times. And so if you went to a farmer and you said, hey, when are you going to do your first hay cutting? What date? He'd look at you like, when it's ready, right? And if the growing season was early, he'd do the cutting early. If it was late, he'd do it late. Well, we found that in the past, we had a time frame for herbicide application that was very specific, and in a location that was very specific. And we ran into a situation last year where we had a permit to treat starry stonewort. It wasn't where we thought it would be the year before. It was a matter of feet outside of our permitted area, and therefore we couldn't treat it. So we moved to adaptive management. And what that means is we identify in the fall the most likely areas where we're going to need treatment. We then meet with the DEC on site just before we apply any herbicides, and we jointly evaluate whether they need to be applied at that time, at that location. And by doing that, we are much more cost-effective and efficient. And you saw that in the presentation from Chad. We asked for 944 acres. We'll probably be authorized for 600. The actual number of acres we treat for milfoil will depend on the actual conditions at the time. Likewise, we've applied for 435 acres for curly leaf pondweed. Our mission is to be able to treat the curly leaf pondweed, which has an early growing season. Our mission is to treat it early before it produces the terns, the reproductive seeds. And that way we can drop the biomass before it can provide the growth and the nutrients for the milfoil. And if we do that over a period of a few years, we anticipate long-term management success. As was mentioned, this year, as you know, if you were in the South Basin, it was tough. I mean, it was tough to get your boat. You said impossible? Beyond tough. The CLA has done, I mean, they had their crews out there, but it was massive amount of weeds. So we're looking at working cooperatively and in partnership with the CLA to put in herbicides for navigation channels, just to take some of the pressure off CLA. They do a phenomenal job with what they have, but we want to be part of a cooperative, integrated partnership approach to lake management. As mentioned, last year the CLP acquired riparian rights on the lake, which enabled us to simplify the application process. Before that, each town and village had to submit their own application that we kind of coordinated. Unfortunately, with the wetland regulations, we now go through 2 regulatory reviews rather than just 1. But we are hopeful as we move forward that that process will become more streamlined. Ah, yes. Look at that. It's still morning. You should be thanking me. But thank you, because all of you come out here early on a Saturday, you sit through all these presentations, and it's obvious you have a personal passion for this issue, and that's critical. And of course, we want to make you aware that our organization is 100% volunteer and picking up from the United Way campaign, every dollar stays local. So we have about 1,000 subscribers. We would love to add you. So if you want to be 1,001, let us know. And in conclusion, we are seeing this year, 2026, an unprecedented cooperation from the DEC in terms of flexibility in management and an approach to minimize the amount of herbicides that need to be applied, but ensuring they're applied at the right time, in the right location, with the right results. And we are so thankful for the cooperative support and working relationship we have with North Carolina State University, with the Chautauqua Lake Association, with the Chautauqua Watershed Conservancy, and with all the partners, that we are all pulling in the same direction. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Andy. Again, if anybody has any questions for the CLP, please raise your hand, and our staff will be around to distribute the cards and collect them for your questions. It's been said now from the highest level in the state, because one of the things when I first was able to meet with the acting director of the DEC, he said, you know, the hardest part about Chautauqua Lake is for people to get on the same page. So unfortunately in Albany, we were known for our bickering, for our disputes, for our inability to work together. It's reassuring not only the stakeholders have agreed to this and have worked together, but now it's being understood or seen at the state level. So the needle is changing and it's moving. And those efforts are going to continue, and if not, expand as years go by. At this time, I'd like to invite up Heather Nolan-Caskey, a representative of the Chautauqua Lake Association, to speak on the Chautauqua Lake Association and their efforts in years past and this year.
Hello, everyone. Happy spring. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to be up here today. For those of you that don't know me, like he said, I am Heather from the CLA, kind of my tagline these days with our social media. But I'm here to talk to all of you about what we do at the CLA and what we have planned for you this summer. So here it is March, and our 2026 season is well underway. We have another productive summer planned. Each year we are faced with challenges to overcome, and last year was no different. From the spring knotweed and debris that we removed to the alidea we all saw in July. But after witnessing the tremendous efforts from the community, the municipalities, the lake partners, we can only hope that that momentum will continue for this season. Caring for Chautauqua Lake is a team effort, and you've heard each of us say that today. As we saw last summer, great things can be accomplished if we can work together. So behind the scenes, our shop is finalizing our equipment for the summer. Every year, each piece of equipment is brought in and maintained. Last summer really gave our equipment a workout, but thankfully it is all ready to be launched. Our office staff has been working on our grants and our fundraising, hiring the summer crew, and we're always looking for ways to make things run more smoothly, not just in the office, but in the field, on the water. We're talking with lake partners. We're ensuring that everybody's on the same page and that we're all ready to handle whatever this summer may bring. Last summer, our office fielded over 350 phone calls. That's not including the ones that came directly to my cell phone. That's not including the many emails that came into our office. Just phone calls to the front desk. Plus, there were several walk-ins. Each of those calls were personally addressed, whether by a field supervisor, by a crew leader, or by myself. We believe that personalized follow-up strengthens our community support. And it resulted in over 1,000 new social media followers, which is kind of huge considering the conditions that we had last summer. We, again, are planning some early surveying. This informs us where the vegetation is growing so that we can make our work plans and the crews know exactly where they're going to hit at the first of the season. Though we have decades of experience on the water, annual studies that give us our recommendations where we should find the weeds, often we see things changing, and surveying helps us be better prepared for the upcoming season. We have a new pontoon boat this year and a water supervisor that's going to be manning that boat. This will allow us to respond faster when there's a water emergency. That could be equipment failure, that could be weather, but that will help assist with that. That boat will also be used to gather information, plant growth, areas of need, effects of our harvesting in an area, just seeing how quickly the weeds are growing back or what those conditions look like after we've been there. Did we do a good job? They'll be using both visual and technology to determine those growths. So we'll have fish finders and things like that on board. It'll also provide more supervision to the crews and assist with some of those public interactions that we deal with every year, responding to calls and just simply evaluating conditions. We will again have 4 offloading sites. Many of you may have heard, in addition to our traditional sites, which are Mayville, Long Point, and Lakewood, but last year we added Asheville Bay. That greatly helped our efficiency. So we will have all 4 of those sites ready for immediate use this summer. We're also looking to add another possible site just in case, planning in case for the worst. You know, you always plan for the worst and hope for the best. So we have another site that we're looking at in the Southern Basin near the Fluvanna area that would just speed up our transport and trucking, making things a little more efficient if there was a great need. So last year, we also found out that we needed trucks, that the traditional 3 trucks we used was simply not enough to keep up. So this year, we have several capital grant requests in place, but we're also reviewing rental companies, just as a way that we can man those trucks within if we can do long-term contracts for the summer. And like Andy mentioned, we've also partnered with the lake organizations to ensure channels are clear and marked for the lake users. This was a huge challenge last year, and something, even though those channels were there, people couldn't find them, people couldn't see them. So we're hoping if there is a great need this year, that somehow we can get them marked so you guys as lake users can easily see where those navigational channels are and get to where you want to be going. So next I wanted just to talk a little bit about one of the strengths of the CLA, and that's our adaptability. Something not typically mentioned. And as you've heard, we have multiple plans and backup plans to handle whatever Mother Nature sends our way, but you can't always clearly say, today on March 21st, I'm gonna start on this day and our equipment is gonna be here. It's hard to predict exactly where the need is gonna be until we're out there and on the water. But having all these different plans and experience, it tells us we have an idea of where those things are, but with Mother Nature often changing, we have to have that flexibility to be ready and multiple strategies to handle whatever might occur. What I can tell you for certain about the CLA is that everything is in place. Our equipment is ready. Our staff is ready. We have several returning employees ready to go now if we were to tell them. So as soon as Mother Nature unleashes the summer's challenges, CLA is prepared to handle them in any way. Our annual debris cleanup will begin as usual in April. Our harvesters will be launched and ready. Conveyors will be on site and ready to go. Our shore crews will be added as they become available as school ends. Boat stewards will be at the public launches. And we're hoping, in addition to all of that, that we can again increase our public awareness and continue the communication, encouraging public participation and community engagement. We plan to circulate our work plans weekly, as we've done in the past, but additionally to the towns and villages. This, we believe, the sharing of information will be helpful and give everyone a clear plan where they can expect us, so they'll know that we're in their area. We have fundraisers and we have events planned. Many of you may have just received our fund drive letters. Please read them. Please support us if you can. But as you can see, you know, CLA is busy year-round. It's not just these few months in the summer. We are busy year-round. And as we all know, Chautauqua Lake is a shared commitment. We all have similar goals. Together, we can make a difference. So thank you all for your trust and support as we navigate this upcoming season. And thank you again for offering the CLA time to speak today. If you have any questions or concerns, please visit our office. Call us, email us. We love to hear your ideas and we love to hear from you in general. And we look forward to the continued team effort for another summer on Chautauqua Lake. I hope to see you all on the water soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. What a great job. Again, we can't stress enough the new collaborative efforts that are really moving forward, and excited to make sure that things are moving and forming in the way. So at this time, we're a little bit ahead of schedule, and without further ado, some of you are probably waiting as anticipatingly as many, including myself. This year, we made a decision as members of the Alliance prior to the restructuring to hire a lake management consultant. I could tell you, being part of the Alliance now for 6 years, this was the only, and members correct me if I'm wrong, the only decision that was made unanimously. At some point, there's maybe one or two people that have a concern, and we understand, dissent when we're making a vote. But this decision was made unanimously by all partners, and that was to hire GEI. And what GEI has done is given us that opportunity to hire a lake management consultant. Now, AJ Reyes has been that consultant, and trust me, has been under the gun, in the crosshairs, feet to the fire, anything you could possibly imagine. He has heard, he's discussed, he's met with our stakeholders, he's met with various groups around the lake. So this isn't just a one-sided approach. This isn't one person's idea, but yet a strategy combined to make a positive change in our lake. So without further ado, and not putting him on the spot too much, he doesn't walk on water even when the weeds aren't out there. But again, at this time, I'd like to introduce our new lake manager, AJ Reyes from GEI Consultants.
Thank you, PJ, for putting absolutely no pressure on this talk. So, as PJ mentioned, my name is AJ Reyes. I'm an aquatic ecologist and certified lake manager working for GEI Consultants. I was hired by the Alliance last year to provide overall scientific consulting and advice for both the Alliance's operations, but also be a resource for all of the different partners. So, because I'm sort of the new kid on the block here, I wanted to take a little bit of time and explain my background and sort of where I come from, where I believe about management, and sort of how that integrates into what we're trying to achieve with the Alliance advisement and then also on the lake. So I am a certified lake manager through the North American Lake Management Society. I have about a decade of lake management experience, not just in the Northeast. I've worked in North Carolina, Alaska, Wyoming, a lot of different lakes on a lot of different systems that are both smaller and larger and kind of a similar size to Chautauqua. Mostly I do water quality and aquatic invasive species, aquatic plant management, monitoring, and planning. But I spend a lot of time just working on general lake issues. One of the big things that I try to focus on in our practice and our management is lake management focused with the people, and we'll talk about how that integrates in a little bit. And I've worked for roughly about 70 lakes across the United States, specifically in the Northeast. So I'm not a one-man shop. We have a lot of people that can help us at GEI. These are our sort of direct team members here, the three next to my picture up here. And we also have a larger lake management support team, and their role is basically to provide complementary consulting as needed. So we have watershed experts, we have wetland delineators, wetland experts, we have internal nutrient loading experts as well, aquatic plant management from all across the country, both Wisconsin, in California, Denver as well. So most of the work that's being done is really kind of channeled through me and the direct team, but we have these resources that we can pull on if needed, if a question comes up. So what is a scientific advisor, and how is this not just a duplication of all the different stuff that we have currently? So we like to think about a scientific advisor in lake management as really sort of a marriage between the science that's going on and the human uses. And that's really the big definition of lake management. You can't have lake management without the science, and you can't have lake management without the people that are using and benefiting from the resource. So we try to sort of marry those two to create good, sensible recommendations to move forward with management on the lake. So our primary goal, our primary objective is to advise the Alliance Board on a variety of different lake management topics, sometimes, no pun intended, getting into the weeds on some, but also, kind of taking a step back and looking at a wider approach. We pride ourselves that we provide independent third-party assessment. We are not tied to one particular management strategy, one particular partner. We like to look at things from a larger perspective, from our decades of experience working with a bunch of different lakes in the state. So our charge is mostly focused on in-lake maintenance. However, we do deal with some nutrients and some watershed work, so that'll be reflected in our recommendations. But most of our charge has really been with lake maintenance, herbicides, harvesting, what's done. So on the year-to-year basis, we're able to be as optimal as we can with the use of the lake. So 2025 was sort of a kickoff year, if you could say, for our work. Our goal was to become familiar with Chautauqua Lake, provide preliminary recommendations for improved management, and assist in ongoing lake management when needed. So we did a lot of different things in 2025 to sort of get ourselves up to speed. We had some lake reconnaissance visits where we went out, we shot around the entire lake to as many different spots as we could go, both in the spring and the summer to see different conditions. We also spent a lot of time talking to a lot of the different partners. And once again, I want to thank all the partners for being very generous with your time, especially when I drilled probably way too far down into some of the operations. It's, I am a lake nerd at heart, so sometimes I get carried away with that kind of stuff, but I appreciate everyone's willingness to kind of talk to me about all this and what the challenges are and how they see different management happening. We also did a lot of background research. So there's been a lot of work done on Chautauqua Lake, and that's been highlighted today. Our goal was to take the most relevant work to what we're trying to advise upon and review it and see what we can come up with in terms of reasonable recommendations. We didn't review every single study under the sun. I think that would have to be my entire job to be able to get that done in 1 year, but we tried to review some of the more recent and most consequential reports and studies to help give recommendations. We also provide advice on funding allocation. The Chautauqua Lake Watershed Management Alliance is responsible for awarding funds to different groups to perform different lake management activities, so we played a key role in trying to help assist decision-making in that process. And then also for some adaptive management, we did spend a lot of time working on the South Basin Eladia, thinking about how this is gonna look not just this year, but for potentially into the future. And our goal is kind of moving forward is to be a resource both for stuff that happens immediately during the season, but also kind of take that longer term perspective as well. So the next section, I'm going to get into some recommendations that we've given, and the theme of the recommendations, some of them are going to be relatively granular, some of them are going to be relatively broad. And one of the benefits, I guess, of going last is you have to hear a lot of the different perspectives from all the different partners on what has been achieved and what needs to be achieved and what the priorities are. And we hope to be sort of a complement to all of that and sort of bringing everybody together and sort of keep making sure things are moving in this great direction which they are moving in so far. So that's sort of the general theme, and I'll try to make sure I keep hitting on that as we move forward. So one of the first things we wanted to look at was the aquatic plant surveys that are being conducted by the different contractors both comparable, and are they sufficient for what we're trying to achieve on the lake? One of the reasons you do aquatic plant surveys is to inform the management actions that all the groups are spending a lot of money on, spending a lot of time on. So we really wanted to dig into these surveys to really see where there were holes, where there were gaps, where there's places where there's opportunities or not. And I'm not going to pretend to know all the history about the different conversations between the different surveys. I know that's been a long conversation. What I will say is, in our review, we believe that the methodology for both surveys is largely comparable, mostly with the rake tosses. There are differences here or there, but none of those differences are large enough to, I think, create any sort of consequential consternation or, really significant debate. There are differences in terms of the interpretation of the results and how each group takes that data and creates conclusions upon that, and there are differences in terms of operational study design in terms of the number of points, but largely these surveys are generally comparable. So it's not something I think we need to really continue to focus on. I think we can move past sort of the conversation about the surveys and sort of the comparability between them and sort of move towards how does this affect our management, how does this affect our use of the lake moving forward. So another thing I wanted to mention is while these surveys have been very, very great at giving us a lot of information, they're not answering all the questions that we need to answer. And this is not a criticism of any survey, because any lake manager knows that not every survey is designed to answer every single question in the way that it needs to be answered. So most of these surveys are large point intercept surveys that are geared at understanding lake-wide trends. And while you can glean some site-specific items from them, they become very limited when you start to extend out what they can particularly answer. So that's why we believe that there's a real strong need to do some supplementary sort of more applied research management type surveys to answer these more specific questions. So I'll actually get into that second part in a little bit, but I wanted to talk about our first big recommendation. While looking through a lot of the different past research, while there's been a lot of different surveying of aquatic plants on Chautauqua Lake by many different organizations, and I think we have a good grasp on what's happening on a lake-wide scale, there's never really been a concerted, consolidated effort to understand how effective our management actions have actually been on the lake. So many of the different surveys look at lake-wide trends, they look at trends over the year, but the questions of is this particular herbicide affecting Eurasian water milfoil? Is the harvesting being effective in clearing out lanes? None of these questions have really been tackled in a concise and specific way. There have been attempts to sort of get at some of this in the past with different contractors, but there's never really been an attempt to think about, all right, this money that we're spending on all these management actions, what are their actual impacts to what we're doing? So what we're going to be doing this year is consolidating the data both from NC State and SUNY Oneonta and Racine Johnson, bringing them all together, bringing that as well with the past treatment data, and on trying to answer some basic questions. How effective has the treatments for Celoron been on Eurasian water milfoil throughout the years? How has early season curly-leaf palmweed treatments affected later season native communities? Are there differences between the aquatic plant communities inside, let's say, fish habitat zones versus non-fish habitat zones? So this is leveraging all the data that we've already collected and spent a lot of money on and spent a lot of time collecting into answering questions that are directly relevant for management. You'll notice that I didn't mention harvesting, and that's not because I'm taking an opinion one way or the other. As I said before, aquatic plant surveys are they're not designed to answer every single question, and unfortunately, the point intercept design is not really great for answering questions about harvesting efficiency. So we are working to try to figure out what makes the most sense to evaluate the harvesting and how impactful it is, because harvesting is a little bit different in terms of its outcomes, in terms of how it interacts. So it would be inappropriate to try to fit a square peg into a round hole and come up with a conclusion that may not actually be supported. So we are looking at the harvesting, but we're looking at it in a little bit of a different way. So to kind of jump back to something I said before is the consideration of additional survey methodologies. Once again, the surveys are great, but they're not designed to answer every single type of question in a level of specificity that can be important for our outcomes. So what we recommend, and this is sort of echoing a lot with Dr. Richardson said before, is focusing on the different life cycles and the different aspects of management and kind of targeting efforts towards that will really help us understand what's going on. So reproductive surveys are really the standard for aquatic plant management, especially for these species that depend on reproductive structures for their life cycles, both curly-leaf palmweed with turions and starry stonewort with their bulbil production. So we believe that our survey should move towards helping to answer those direct questions. How many years do you need to treat a curly-leaf palmweed patch before it drops out, or before you get to that maintenance mode? Can you actually get effective long-term reduction of bulbils using, let's say, the Moby track removal? All those sorts of questions are incredibly important, but you can't start to answer them unless you understand what is going on with these reproductive structures. Some surveys have tried to get at this in different ways, but we really need a more direct answer. And this is the standard, we believe, within aquatic plant management that should be applied here on Chautauqua. And then also, once again, thinking about the harvesting, do we need to integrate different targeted biovolume surveys to assess harvesting efficiency? Once again, getting that to the idea that understanding the outcomes is a little bit more difficult than understanding some other outcomes, so we need to make sure we tailor an approach there. And then, can some of the other survey efforts maybe be shifted to support those outcomes in a more operational sense? So something else we looked at is sort of how the different management plans have been interacting with each other. And this is very important because when you write a management plan, the hope is, and I believe that Chad, you mentioned this a little bit before, that these plans need to actually be actionable and they need to move towards and same thing with monitoring, it needs to move towards some sort of an action. I graduated from SUNY Oneonta, where our thesis was to create a management plan for a lake, and I spent days and nights and weekends spending all my time creating this beautiful management plan, and the minute I left school, it became a paperweight. So, we have a direct experience with, when you create these plans, they have to be usable and they have to have longevity over time. So thinking about all the plans we have currently, we believe that in our review that the NC State Management Plan is a strong operational piece of a plan that should be continued to be supported, not just by the CLP, but all the other organizations around the lake. It's not perfect. There are places where it can improve, and I think that's every plan in terms of its adaptive management, but we need a consolidated plan that we can support and put our support behind moving forward. Granting agencies love to see plans that are consistent and are being followed over time. DEC is more favorable to permit applications that come in that have an underpinning of plans and underpinning of scientific justifications. So it's important to sort of get behind a plan. Now, it doesn't mean, once again, the plan is not this, holy grail of it can never be changed. The point of it is adapting as new information comes out, as there's different challenges that are happening on the lake. But we really need to sort of get behind this sort of strategy, but also recognize that where this strategy sits. So I have this sort of figure here on the right-hand side, where we kind of look at the macrophyte management strategy, the NC State Management Plan, and sort of the annual action plans. And while each of these plans answer sort of different specific questions, they all sort of act together, right? The macrophyte management strategy that was put out in 2017 gives us the sort of broad lay of the land of all the different background research. The NC State Plan takes that a next step to create really operational guidance for year over year with the different tiered approaches and the focus on phenology. However, that NC State Plan is not going to be as useful unless there's annual action plans by the CLA, the CLP, the CWC, all the groups looking to actually execute on what these recommendations are. So all of these things work together, and it's important to really keep those in mind. And then another one I wanted to focus on is it's important to think about, we have all of the techniques that are really both scientifically proven in terms of potential to be successful, and that have relatively small non-target impacts already. So this, I believe that we shouldn't spend our time trying to search for some brand new silver bullet technique out there that nobody's tried. And this is something we deal with in lake management all the time, especially when lakes run into walls in terms of, let's say, their management's not working. One of the first instincts is to say, wow, look at this brand new technique that's out there that could change things. And what we find, though, is that most of the time when we're out searching for these other techniques that could potentially solve all of our issues, we sort of leave what we have sort of on the table. And I think really we should need to focus on optimization. How are we making the herbicide treatments better and more effective? How are we making the harvesting more useful for management? And sort of focusing on that versus trying to find something else that's out there. Unfortunately, in lake management, our aquatic plant toolbox is limited. There's not much we can do. We talk about dredging. Chad mentioned a little bit about just with internal loading, but mentioned, there's a scalability to dealing with sort of in-lake issues like that. Grass carp would be a real detriment to this lake in any way possible. Water level drawdowns, while not even potentially possible, may have all these other detrimental impacts. So we've already done the hard work of sort of eliminating the techniques that it would either have tremendous non-target impacts and also may not be feasible. So let's focus on what we have and sort of keeping up with those and optimizing them in a better way. So wanted to drill down into some very specific recommendations. So we've heard from different groups today about about starry stonewort. So starry stonewort is an invasive macroalgae that was introduced into Chautauqua Lake a few years ago, and it's been the subject of a lot of different management. And I really want to applaud this group for being very quick and fast to recognize that this could be a potential issue and to spend a lot of money and resources to try to get rid of it. That's really a key component of any sort of invasive species management, is you get on top of it, you hit it hard, and you hit it fast. However, the big concern is that you can't just do that, and those efforts need to be focused. We have the CLA and the CWC doing great work with the dash harvesting and the Moby tracks trying to work there. However, on a parallel track, we have CLP looking at herbicides. And what we really need to do is we need to consolidate all those efforts into sort of a singular vision and a plan to make sure that we're achieving what we want to achieve. This is a very critical time for starry stonewort because it has not invaded the rest of the lake. It's still on if you think about the invasion curve, it's still potentially increasing. So the more that we can sort of think about our efforts and sort of consolidate them and point them all sort of in the right direction, the more likelihood we're going to be successful, and we're not just throwing money at a problem to throw money at a problem. So what we would like to do is we would like to develop, and we're going to be doing this year, is develop an overall Starry Stormwater management strategy and plan that has actionable goals, thresholds, and objectives, and clear objectives to be say, all right, in the year one, we were successful here, here, and here, and we have opportunities to improve here, here, and here, which is something we currently don't have. And a big part of this is to sort of form a structure to be able to deal with management. And this is largely going to be done by forming what's called a technical advisory group, which is going to be a panel of experts both around the nation that specialize in Starry Stormwater and aquatic plant management. And these experts are going to be separate from stakeholders and separate from a lot of the different other groups, so they can provide unbiased scientific advice on what's working, what's not, what's also had been working in other systems, because there's a lot of other states that are dealing with Starry Stormwater. And to be able to provide that advice so we can get this unbiased advice and it can be moved up the chain so we can set priorities moving forward. And we hope that this is an opportunity to engage everybody, with sort of the everyone on the ground, like CLA and CLP doing and CWC doing the actual management, what we are calling a day-to-day coordinator who's going to be coordinating all these activities, making sure that the management plan is being done in a correct way, and then feeding that information to the TAG, who's going to take that information, say, well, things are on the right track, or this other, other lakes out here are trying different techniques, and then eventually move that to the board, which can make recommendations on how to move forward. So basically, this is saying we have a lot of great energy about Starry Stormwater. We've identified that it's an issue, but let's all kind of let's point everything in sort of the right direction and move all together. This is such a critical time for Starry Stormwater management, and it's important that we do it in a smart, consolidated way. So this is something that I'm sure you haven't heard anything about today, is the issues in the South Basin. But I want to take a little bit of a different perspective here. So we've had a large growth of both Elodea, and there were some other plants mixed in the South Basin this year. And there's been a lot of conversations about why did it happen, what made this year specific to next year. And while all those questions are definitely interesting in an academic sense, we believe that it's more important to focus on, if this situation happens again, can we be prepared to do it? Can we be prepared to manage effectively? So this year, when the Elodea popped up in the South Basin, the CLA moved heaven and earth to get as much material down to that South Basin to do the best that they could. However, because of just the structure for DEC permitting requirements and just the nature of something happening randomly throughout the year, we weren't able to sort of manage it in the most effective way. And that was going to happen, right? I wouldn't say that was sort of a negative per se, because this was sort of something that really hasn't happened all the time. But now that we know that this happens, we need to come up with sort of a longer-term strategy to think about, if this happens again, can we be prepared to deal with it? And obviously lanes are one way to do with that, but I'm really talking about a more broad-scale approach to something like this. And this is one concept for lanes. To be clear, this is not what the CLP submitted. This is something that we actually did in parallel in terms of conceptual lanes. But the general idea that I'm trying to show with this map, and just generally, is all lake users should be able to access all parts of the lake throughout the year at relatively minimum impedance, right? It is a lake. There are going to be plants that are growing. You're going to have probably times you're going to have to go through somewhat less than optimal vegetation. But the point of any plan that comes out is, can we make sure that everybody at least has the chance to get places where they need to go? Now, we know the CLP has put in their own application for herbicides, and at the Alliance, we're not interfering with them. We're not providing additional insight in terms of the DEC. We're letting that process play out however it's going to play out. But what we want to focus on is, what does this look like in the long term? Are these lanes something we establish every year and we manage every year? What is the interplay between how much CLA is going to be responsible for harvesting and maintaining these lanes, or is this just going to be an herbicide approach? These are all questions that we really haven't figured out yet. Do these lanes need to expand or contract? How do these lanes interfere with potential native species habitat or other ongoing management? These are all questions that really need to be answered right now, so we build a long-term strategy that is acceptable. It's very possible that the Elodea does not become a problem for the next 5 or 10 years. And what happens oftentimes in lake associations and lake communities is that if it's not at the front of our thought process, we start to not think about it. And then if a problem comes up in another 5, 10 years, we might not be prepared to deal with it. So we're kind of trying to take the long-term perspective is, can we, once again, framing everything around access, can everyone get to where they need to go without creating undue non-target impacts and so on. So once again, this is just a conceptual idea. This is not the permit. This is not what's been submitted. This is just kind of the idea of what just generally we think should happen. So moving on to some other topics, we have similar with aquatic plants, we have a lot of water quality data and a lot of great water quality data. We have a long record of CSLAP data, which is the Citizen Statewide Lakes Assessment Program data. We have really high frequency and high quality data through the Jefferson Project and other different water quality endeavors, both DEC's sampling as well. However, one thing that we realized when we were looking through all the background research is while there's a lot of this great technical information, there's not a lot of ways that this technical information is communicated to the layperson. The layperson that doesn't necessarily understand the difference between cylindrospermopsin and anatoxin A, the ones that don't understand co-limitation between phosphorus and nitrogen. You know, what does the everyday user need to know about their water quality? And I think this is a real opportunity for us to take all this great work that's been done and consolidate it and communicate it back to the community in a way that the average user that comes up for the weekend can take a quick look and say, wow, the water quality is great this year. Or they can say, well, the lake doesn't look that great. And then they can look at this, whatever the product ends up being, and say, well, this is kind of what I thought, or maybe this is a little bit different. And the importance of communicating what we've actually done and what we've achieved in water quality, I think is incredibly important for also building support. You know, most of the lakes that I work on, you know, I provide them reports of various different technical natures, and almost every single one of them asks me for either a short summary, a short scorecard, some sort of a way that they can interpret and also communicate with the rest of their community. And I think this is a real opportunity for the Alliance to potentially provide something like this. So this could be in the form of a quick newsletter, a short scorecard. So for other lakes, we've done sort of the stoplight, right? Poor water quality, fair water quality, great water quality, and can really highlight the different aspects of what we're doing. So I mentioned before in the beginning of the talk that lake management is not just science, it's about the people. So when you're managing a lake and you're trying to understand what's going on, yeah, surveys and different research projects can tell you a lot about how a specific action is working, how different seasonal trends go on. But at the end of the day, it's not going to be as impactful unless the people on the lake feel that it's going to be impactful. So you really can't make informed lake management decisions without understanding what the community really wants. And we have a lot of different community outreach here and a lot of different community input, right, through all the stuff that the different partner organizations done. However, when we're talking about making actual management decisions, I believe that we could use a strong sort of lake-wide lake usability survey to really get at the question of, are people happy with the state of the lake in a current year? And this could be done on a yearly basis, on a biannual basis. This could be something very, very simple in terms of maybe a few questions, just gauging how use is. But this is incredibly important for us making decisions. We're not spending all this money because we're trying to, let's say, reduce Eurasian water milfoil. We're spending all this money because the reduction of Eurasian water milfoil is supposed to translate into more usability of the lake. The same thing with HABs. You know, HABs are not a problem on their own unless you contextualize them with the human uses and the actual ecosystem as well. So we were recommending a lake-wide survey to sort of cut through a lot of the different noise in terms of different groups, let's say having a more outsized voice or maybe not being represented, and just get an idea of what all the lake stakeholders are feeling about the lake. And then we can marry that feeling with what we're actually seeing with the science to come up with recommendations that make sense. And then quickly on the watershed, you know, we've done a lot of work on the watershed on Chautauqua for years and years and years, and it's been excellent. We know that there's obviously work on the TMDL, there's work on potentially revising the TMDL, the implementation plan, and all the different stormwater management work that's done. You know, we thought that one thing that could be added to this that would be really beneficial is let's get a sort of user-friendly cataloging system of all of these different actions that have taken place. So when you're in meetings and you're saying, well, we've done a bunch of watershed management, you could show, hey, look, we've worked in, in Bemis Creek for all these different years, and we've done this sort of work there, and we're expecting this sort of phosphorus reduction, and getting that all into sort of one space so the common person, the regular user can see, wow, we've actually done a lot of this work. You know, because you can look, and really it's hard to kind of find sort of the comprehensive look of what's all been done. We think this would be really beneficial both for sort of having local support for different projects and also keeping track of what's done. And a lot of different groups do something like this. New York City DEP for their drinking water does this with their programs, and a bunch of the different watersheds. So we think this could be a really sort of complementary tool to help build public support. And once you see all the work that's being done, it really puts it in a different context. So the last recommendation I'll talk about is the integration between fisheries and aquatic plant management. So there is a lot of conversations about how fisheries impact vegetation, how vegetation impacts fisheries, and it's incredibly complicated. Different species have different life histories that are impacted by vegetation. Sometimes management impacts do have impacts on fisheries, sometimes they don't. But really what I think the Alliance and what I think we can take a better role at is sort of integrating and sort of assisting the DEC and the other groups that are looking at fisheries into understanding some of these questions. The DEC has a lot of great data on fisheries in the lake, especially with walleye and muskellunge, which they've been spending a lot of time on. However, as sort of the similar theme with some of the aquatic plant surveys, some of that data may not be as relevant to answer some of the questions that are important for us to be able to answer to think about aquatic vegetation management. For example, how much is the walleye decline potentially linked to aquatic vegetation? We don't know that that's the case or not, but even if we wanted to ask that question, we don't have the data to be able to even ask that in a relevant way. Are changes in largemouth bass dynamics linked to treatments? If we wanted to answer that question, once again, we don't really have the data to answer that. So I'm not recommending here that we spend a whole lot of time and a whole lot of resources on this, but I think being a more active partner in thinking about our fisheries in terms of how they're impacting our aquatic vegetation could be really important in the future. If, let's say, we see a decline in largemouth bass in 4 or 5 years, I'm not saying that would happen, but if that happens, then at least we have the data and the structure to make a sound conclusion about that instead of just guessing, saying, well, the harvesting really destroyed the fishery or the herbicides really destroyed the fishery. If you have the data to be able to go back and see that, we can answer those questions and then move forward with something. So this could be in the form of supporting more annual surveys. This could be in the form of supporting a graduate student to maybe answer specific questions about the fisheries that's important. And obviously this would be 100% done with DEC oversight and guidance, because we also want to make sure that anything that we're doing is something that they're going to feel that has value, and it's something that's going to be used over time. So looking ahead to 2026, we are going to be expanding what we're doing, continuing to support the lake management activities, providing the review of the management actions, and developing science-based approaches. So there's a much longer list of recommendations that we provided. I only included a few of them here. But what we're going to be mostly focusing on next year is the long-term lake management strategy analysis, the stormwater management strategy, and continuing our conversations with partners and continuing support. And the last thing I want to leave you on is, one of the benefits of working with a lot of different lakes is I get to see a lot of the inner workings, a lot of the different communities that are looking to support lakes. And, these meetings and these sort of gatherings of all the different lake stakeholders are incredibly important. And I can tell you, even though I'm sure everyone in this room has disagreements about the specific ways that management has happened, the fact that you are here on a Saturday and engaged puts your group well above most other lake groups that we work with. Oftentimes, it's like pulling teeth to get some lake groups to actually care enough about their lake to do something, to allocate resources. So I really want to take this time to pat everyone on the back. The fact that you're here and the fact that you're engaged puts the progress of management well above what most of our other lakes are dealing with. Most lake management does not get done and not get done effectively without the community. You could hire researchers to come up with problems, you can hire consultants to contextualize those problems and give you strategies, but none of that matters unless the communities are engaged. So take this as a real positive sign. Everyone's here, everyone's working together. It's not just a slogan we say to feel good about ourselves and kumbaya. This is how lake management works, and this is how things move forward in a successful way. So thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, AJ. As always, we're going to have a little bit of time. We got done a little bit earlier than we thought. So out of respect, we're going to take time for a few questions. We have been collecting questions in the back. If you're submitted questions to us, not every one of them will be answered right now, but we will get those to the respective presenter, and we'll move on. But we do have time for a few questions. We chose questions that were asked of two different presenters at the same time. So at this time, we're just going to start out quickly. This one's for CLA. You mentioned a trucking issue. Could we coordinate an effort to have our town highway, the town highways departments around the lake, take an afternoon, one afternoon a week for weed trucking in their area? And could all towns be asked?
Thank you for the question. That was something we actually looked into last summer when the original emergency arose. So a lot of our towns and village trucks work with other towns and villages doing paving projects and things like that in the summer and the time that we need them. So though they do have a lot of trucks, even if they're not working in their towns or villages, a lot of times they are busy in other areas in our county. So we have asked, and it is still something, you know, if we can work it out, great, but that was the initial sense, that those trucks are really busy during that time, just like we are.
Just to add to that, you know, when this happened last year, the lake stakeholders got together, agencies helped and assisted, including the county. So we did have a stake in that. But as Heather said, a lot of our towns and villages are really strapped, and their projects are in a timely manner. So they will help, but again, it's a matter of coordinating when and where this can happen. So for the panel, or in particular AJ, and I think really it's for our researchers, will there be an extensive spring abundance and density survey for curly leaf pondweed in 2026?
I believe the answer to that question is yes. There's the intention to do a spring survey specifically evaluating curly leaf pondweed.
All right, thank you. Don't forget today to take a time to stop by some of the actually the tables that are in the back. We have the Chautauqua Lake Watershed, the Chautauqua Watershed Conservancy, Chautauqua Lake Partnership, Chautauqua Lake Association, Chautauqua County Soil and Water is out there, the Conewango Chautauqua Consortium is out there, along with the County Health Department and Chautauqua County Planning and Economic Development. So please, if you haven't, I know some of them are wrapping up, so if you have a chance to stop, please stop by and take some little time to ask some questions. This one is for AJ and Dr. Richardson. Is there any study of correlating sediment characteristics to promoting EWMT CLP growth in fresh sediment and the deposition of facilitating robust EWM growth?
So this, as far as I know, and Rob, please feel free to jump in here. There has been a lot of seminal research on like the concentrations of phosphorus and nitrogen in sediment related to aquatic plant growth. The thing to though consider is, you know, the results of why we get excessive growth is not purely because of nutrient enrichment per se. It also has to do with competition that happens throughout the season and other factors. You know, milfoil, for example, is very good at being a first colonizer in areas and also creating its own competitive advantages. So while there has been research that has shown there's been increases with, you know, Eurasian water milfoil and other of these species with increased sediment concentrations, that's not sort of simply the story. We do know that milfoil can take advantage of different forms of nitrogen, especially nitrates, and they also can actually be pumps of nitrogen as well. However, once again, all of this stuff, you have to contextualize this in the entire lake. Just because a lab or a study finds that there's a correlation between them, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's how it's going to manifest itself in the lake itself.
Okay, thank you. There are methods to focus on inactivating or removing phosphorus from the lake, such as dredging, chemical inactivation, and hypolytic operation or oxygenation. For anyone on the panel, do you believe these could be options for Chautauqua Lake?
I can, I can speak to the nutrient inactivation piece a bit. because that's something we have talked a lot about for managing phosphorus. There's no good solution with that for nitrogen, so it's focusing mostly on phosphorus. Currently, those sorts of chemical inactivants are not allowed in New York State. There's a bill in the assembly right now about them. That being said, the state generally seems open to doing some pilot projects dealing with those to see if they are safe and effective. So that's something that we are looking into this year.
Thank you. This one's for the DEC. Chad, if you could please explain the Drinking Water Source Protection Plan. How can the DWSP help protect all our watersheds in the lake? And then secondly, how can towns initiate a drinking water source protection plan?
So I haven't dealt a lot with drinking water source protection plans. My understanding is that they are not enforceable from like DEC's perspective. So they're really guidance documents that the municipalities use to try to implement some best management practices, to protect drinking water source plans. So really, it's not anything that somebody can say, hey, this is in the drinking water source management plan and it trumps whatever DEC's permitting authority is or something like that. They're really just management tools for municipalities to use in terms of how they're managing development within their towns and other items like that.
All right, thank you. Dr. Reisick, this is for you. Are sonic pure ultrasound treatments usable here to kill the algae in Chautauqua Lake in shoreline areas? And second, these systems are active in larger bodies of water. Is it applicable for Chautauqua Lake?
Wait, can you repeat the second part of that again?
It just says there are systems that are active in other large bodies of water. Could this be active in Chautauqua Lake?
Yeah, so I think in Chautauqua Lake, that's kind of a problem of scale. So where these strategies have been effective have been mostly small ponds. I don't see it being an effective strategy for Chautauqua Lake just because it's so big. Because if you had these sorts of setups even near the shoreline, you still have tons of water currents, everything moving around. You would need to cover the entire lake, which I do not, unfortunately, think is feasible.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Richardson, what other beneficial native pondweed species are early growers potentially killed by deer cast also? Or clear cast, sorry.
Well, there are numerous different pondweed species that occur in Chautauqua, and there are a few that grow early. The curlyleaf life cycle is unusual. There really aren't other plants here that sprout in fall over winter and then take off that early in spring. There's some that sprout fairly early in spring, but none that really mimic curlyleaf's life cycle. As I think the second part was herbicide clearcast, was that right?
Yeah.
As far as clearcast goes, it's one of the most selective herbicides that's available, and by most selective, that means it controls the fewest number of plants relative to not controlling plants. So I don't have, all the pondweed species right in front of me, but the overlap and the efficacy of clearcast would be pretty minimal on other pondweed species in general.
Thank you. Dr. Reisick, what is an acceptable level of phosphorus and nitrogen entering Chautauqua Lake from our creeks? And secondly, this is the second question, part of the question, what are the current levels? And lastly, do you know specifically where these nutrients are coming from?
Okay, that is a great question. I cannot give you numbers off the top of my head. There are specific numbers of target phosphorus levels, as Chad had mentioned, in the TMDL that we are not reaching. Some tributaries are below that, some are above it. There is no TMDL for nitrogen. What was the second part?
Do you know what the current levels are?
Not sure off the top of my head. I mean, we can pull my graphs back up and I can tell you numbers, but We have ideas of where they're the highest, where they're the lowest, but as far as, specific numbers, we always want them to come down. As far as, there was a question about specific.
Yeah, do you know where specifically these nutrients are coming from?
So we know which tributaries most of them are entering. As far as going further up in the watershed, we're not trying to pinpoint any specific properties or anything like that. So we're taking the approach where we have these tributary monitoring stations at the base of the tributaries. That's where we're measuring. That's an integration of everything that's happening in that watershed. From there, if we know where these nutrients are coming in, we can work with organizations like the Watershed Conservancy, see if there's specific spots that we can work. But then also, if you're talking about some of these mitigation strategies, probably are going to be effective at, near the tributary mouths anyway. So that's kind of the approach we're taking. So I can't say specifically where in each, DeWittville Creek watershed. I don't know where these nutrients are specifically coming from, but we know that is an area active for management, and if we can do any management strategies at the base of the tributary, that is likely to be the most effective.
Thank you. This one's for Heather. What is done with the 25 million pounds of weeds the CLA harvests annually? And are there any areas of the lake where you cannot harvest?
So our permits say that we can harvest lake-wide. We do stay away from areas that are not, generally doesn't have homeowners there, and we stay out of the fish zones, which there are several. If those fish zones do have houses in front of them, we are allowed to go in, but we minimize our activity in those areas. So basically, we can go lake-wide as long as there's a house there. You will see us there. And what do we do with the weeds? Last year, we weren't sure what to do with the weeds. Generally, they go to farms around the area. They're used for composting. Not early in the season, but early in July when we had the abundance, we sort of ran out of locations and had to scramble for some new farms and locations, but luckily we found those. And so that's where they're taken.
Thank you. This one's for Dr. Reisick. Is there a rough timeline of when the 2025 report from Jefferson Project will be released?
That is a great question. So we have finished writing it. It is currently being reviewed internally, and then it goes to the DEC to be reviewed. I would say probably in the next 1 to 2 months.
Thank you. Second part of that question, keep that microphone in your hand. Are any techniques going to be deployed before this summer to prevent another large bloom, especially given the information research conducted into why it occurred?
So we are working on implementing some management strategies. We are not going to have any of them deployed this spring, but that will be work we'll be doing throughout the year.
Thank you. Last, we'll have this final question, although many of us know the answer. We're not putting anybody on the spot. But for who has the final decision or authority and responsibility for actions to be taken in or on or around Chautauqua Lake?
I'll fall on the sword for this. So it's not one, right? Each different organization has some ability to implement actions on the lake, especially, for example, herbicides with riparian owners and harvesting with CLA. The hope is that we can move towards a structure and a framework to where these large decisions that are being made can really be kind of more consolidated within maybe 1 or 2 different groups, with the other groups sort of providing the support and implementation for it. So it's not one group. that has the final say. Obviously, DEC has the regulatory say and can change what is exactly how things come out, but it's really more than one group.
Yeah, and just to be clear, we have regulatory permitting authority, right? We're not managing the lake. We don't want to manage the lake for you. What we look at, and we also want to make sure, and what I try hard to do is to make sure that our staff are not really putting their opinions or their perspectives into what we do. We have regulations, we have laws that we follow. That's what we look at. Some things are allowed, some things aren't. Right or wrong, whether you agree with it or not, that's the way it works. So that's really our role. We don't see our role is actively managing the lake. But I do try to, me personally, as well as others at the DEC, to afford enough flexibility, right? There's always enforcement discretion and discretion in what we do, to kind of allow that flexibility to help you achieve what your goals are for the lake.
Following on the same theme, the Alliance allocates literally hundreds of thousands of dollars every year, primarily from our foundations, which are very, very helpful and very effective. And so if they don't fund a project, it's tough to get it off the ground. So you might say, well, your funders have the final say. They have the first say. Ultimately, they have the last say. With the CLP, our herbicide treatment is based on where we saw weeds the prior year, previous surveys, plus what we anticipate from prior experience. We submit an application that's reviewed by the DEC. They typically approve more than we can afford to treat. We then make, as part of our adaptive management strategy, a decision just before we apply based on where the weeds are actually growing and propagating. So each organization has a final say, if you will, in terms of what we can afford to do and what we prioritize. Obviously, we work very closely with the DEC and with the other organizations, so we try to coordinate what we're doing.
Yeah, I agree with all of them, and I think if you think that that answer lands with one individual or one organization, then you were probably eating donuts while I was talking.
I agree with all of that. It isn't one person, it's all of us. All of us with a plan and an action within our budget to perform. And yes, we are regulated as to what we can do, but we're also limited to what's affordable for each of our organizations. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'm just going to agree with that, but also point out that we're lucky we have a lot of different specialties and groups working on kind of different areas of lake management. So I think we have a really good team working together.
I'm just going to say Chad and pass the microphone on.
You know, it was interesting. I thought I was going to stare right at Chad because as we've talked about, the DEC itself is a regulatory board, but everybody blames the DEC when it comes to who's in charge. Realistically, the Department of State owns the bottom of that lake, and therefore, you know, that's the question that goes back. So, again, I appreciate everybody's time today. I appreciate and applaud the survivors that are here. I will say this is our largest group of survivors, if you will. But something to think about as we wrap this up. We need to be honest with ourselves. You know, the ones who make the decisions, the ones who share in the responsibility are all of us here. The elected officials, the residents, the stakeholders, the agencies. We now are the ones who share in what happens in Chautauqua Lake. The lake isn't a resource, it's a legacy. It carries our history, it carries our future, and most importantly, it carries our economies. So what we do from this moment on is up to us. We've heard the science, we've shared ideas. Now the big question is this: are we going to do this in unity, working together collaboratively, and will we move forward without hesitation and not ask why not, but rather why? Let's get it done. The future of Chautauqua Lake is not going to be decided in conferences. Rather, it's going to be decided in our actions moving forward. That's the most important key. Let this not be an ending, but a turning point. Let the future generations come back and say, this is when Chautauqua Lake turned. This is when it changed and we started to move in the right direction. Now, moving in the right direction does not mean, as I think AJ said it, it's not going to be sitting around a campfire out in front of the Chautauqua Harbor Hotel singing Kumbaya, and we did this and everyone's happy. But we have to do this with collaboration. We have to do this with an understanding that there's going to be a give and take as we move forward. But most importantly, the future of this lake is up to us. Future generations are counting on us. We know we have a future generation that are engaging in Chautauqua Lake, but we want to give them something that they can take hold of and be proud of moving forward. It is all up to us to get the job done, but most importantly, it's up to us not to fail Chautauqua Lake. I thank each and every one of you for being here. Our presenters will be here a little bit afterwards to ask some questions. But thank you for everything you've done, and thank you for spending your Saturday here listening to what we're doing here in Chautauqua Lake. Thank you.